So it's a public service announcement to all the simps, the losers of the world. It's time to get red-pilled. Coach Greg, and the Akash situation, it just got even worse.
His money is our money, and my money is my money.
Do you know why I think I have like a good marriage? I think it's because my husband's never here.
Just when you think it couldn't possibly get any worse, his wife decides to make a response. And was this an apology? You know, after reviewing my actions, I regret them. I shouldn't have done those things. I apologize. Absolutely not. Why is it that no one can actually apologize? I mean, what is she, a Mike Israetel fan, Mr. Mike? You can't just say, yeah, I made a mistake. After reviewing the first draft, I decided that my behavior, it wasn't right. It's gotten so bad that now even Myron is just feeling bad for the fella. Bro got friend-zoned in his own marriage. Damn. Akash testosterone levels are definitely in single digits. Now, if you do have lower levels of testosterone, perhaps you need clomiphene, testosterone, Cialis. I mean, if you have a partner that's a 1 and you just can't seem to get it up, you can go and click on AlgoRx, use code Greg for 10% off. Doctor prescribed medications legally prescribed for you. And so if you're looking for cheaper prices than last time, please go to Merrick Health first, compare those prices, and then you do what you have to do. Akash has been real quiet since this dropped. I mean, you would hope that he's out there seeking a lawyer, trying to work through the divorce, or at the very least telling his wife, look, that was the last straw. This is not going to continue, and here's your next move. You're making a video, you're apologizing, you're going to say this, you're going to say that, but no, instead she does the exact opposite.
Her ass is out and she's at the doctor's office, and she's recording it for her TikTok.
I told my husband he couldn't look at me until he got to 1 million followers.
And so she told her husband he can't look at her until she gets 1 million followers, because if you don't have 1 million followers on Instagram, I mean, who even are you?
No, so I felt like I was like at a place where I was ready, and then I found out he was a virgin, and then I was like, ah.
I mean, think of it. Weren't you like given the ick that he was a virgin at 32? When you have certain religious beliefs, it's perfectly okay to not have sex before marriage. Being a virgin at 32 because you're loyal and faithful to your religious beliefs, that is not an ick. It's a green flag.
Yes.
If he can be faithful for 32 years, not having sex with anyone, because the God that they follow said you shouldn't do that, then imagine what they could do for you. They could be loyal forever. If they made it to 32, that's not a red flag. That's not an ick. What, you'd rather be with bro that fingered your butthole the night before that you met on Tinder? Really?
No, so I felt like I was like at a place where I was ready, and then I found out he was a virgin, and then I was like, ah, great. Like, do I have to wait again? But I think like we just connected very well that it went without saying that we wanted to.
And so essentially she's saying, well, he said he was a virgin, and so I just went along with it. I said, yeah, me too. I mean, imagine how dishonest she is. She asked him about his beliefs and so on. He's like, I'm a virgin. And she says, rather than saying, I popped and parted my pussy so many friggin' times, she says, oh, I'm a virgin too. We connect. We're so much alike. She wanted his money because he's a famous comedian.
My wife also hadn't had any sexual partners, so that helped us connect
Okay, buddy.
a lot more.
Now, let me ask you this.
And I
Stupid
You believe her.
If you've seen her, then it's hard to believe.
I mean, there is a saying, you have to triple whatever the amount of partners that she stated. Now, here's the problem in that logic. I mean, perhaps it's accurate for most people, and for most men, you divide it by 3. But 3 times 0 is still 0. And so when she says, hey, I have my V card, you're thinking, well, most women lie. She probably. How many women lie about being a virgin? Not many. It's like when somebody says their height to the 1/4 inch, they're probably being honest. I'm 5'4.5". If somebody says that, they're probably 5'4.5". Now, if they're saying they're 5'8", they're probably 5'6".
I mean, I'm married. Akash is married. Mark is married, right? Yeah. Like, Dove is trying desperately to get married, right? So it's just like, it's possible. Now, granted, we might call you in 10 years and be like, y'all were f***ing right. You know what I'm saying?
I mean, how funny is that this happened 3 years ago and they were making fun of Myron? Oh, you're red pills. You think that matters? This is useless information. How could it benefit me? Because my wife's a virgin. Only to find out she's been parting her pussy to those frat boys for years.
I was popping my pussy.
And she wants her friggin' best friend's husband's 10-inch long upper derriere.
I'm actively trying to have an orgy, and you haven't seen Nav yet, but wait till you see him.
And look at this, guys. This cannot stop embarrassing this nigga, bro. Her ass is out and she's at the doctor's office.
Where's the privacy? Like, do you really want to go to the doctor and your ass is out there? You can see she's naked. Now, she's not quite showing all of it. You don't see the crack and all this stuff. But she's sitting there flirting and smiling while her pants are down. Perhaps the doctor can see her vajayjay. I'm certain that he can. He's got the sunglasses on so that she can't see exactly where he's looking, but I'm sure he's taking it all in. And she's there to do what? To remove a bruise from physical activity? I mean, what exactly is going on? What are they doing? And upon doing what they're doing, she then starts flirting with the doctor. Are you single? And why are you doing that? Is it not bad enough?
I'm mad at my husband because he's too busy working and being a provider. And I'm over here having all these cute outfits, cute shoes, cute bags, like want to do my makeup, want to go out, and he's nowhere to be found. Okay.
And so this is women. I want a man who's rich, makes 6, 7, 8 figures, 6, 7, 8 figures even maybe, just maybe. And so when that man is out there working his ass off to make all that money, to give you that house and car and all the luxury lifestyle that you want, you're now upset with him because you have all these cute outfits that you want to wear, but he's not around. I mean, cry me a river.
Bro, these women are insufferable, chat. I told y'all, man, stay away from these 304s.
I need to beat my husband in followers. Since when is a husband and wife relationship a competition? The relationship is only as good as the sum of the parts. I feel like this is a Mike Israetel analysis. Skill A plus skill B plus skill C equals how you good at that sport. Girl A and boy B added together makes how good the relationship is. If you're trying to beat your partner, are you beating your partner when you're literally on the same team? Like, think of it. You're playing 2-on-2 basketball. You need to beat your partner and how many points you make compared to them. You realize that your scores are added together. And so how many followers you have, if it's more than your partner, it makes no difference because it's the combined unicy of the partners that adds up to if you're winning or losing.
For the longest time, I told my husband he couldn't look at me until he got to 1 million followers because, like,
What?
who the fuck are you if you don't even have 1 million followers on Instagram?
Well, you could be perhaps Coach Gliss. You can get Turk Platinum. Remember, it's got a money-back guarantee and a $20 gift card. 978,000 followers. Now, if you want to help me get to 1 million followers so that she thinks I'm a worthy person to look at on Instagram, well, you can go give me a follow on Instagram. But I'm telling you, whether you have 1 million followers or 1,000 followers, it doesn't matter. Why does it really matter how many followers you have on Instagram? Is that really going to dictate how good of a person, how good of a human being that you really are? And if your woman only wants you, if you have 1 million followers, remember the saying, there's the door.
I'm not a scammer who
I'm not
hustles.
gonna lie, that was
And if I'm not mistaken, I think that's Nav, guys. That's the dude that Akasha's wife was talking about had a 10-inch dick and had a face card. That's him.
And remember, this guy I'm going to give him a 5 out of 10, maybe a 6. Hey, I'm rounding up. This is fine. She's giving him a face card, as in a hall pass. She just wants to bang this guy and use the sweet and blow on him. He's right there in front of her husband. I mean, how bad can this get? You're literally flirting with another man, saying how hot he is and how big his schlong is, right in front of your husband.
I have 3 questions about Luigi. Okay, Akash is mad.
She's talking about Luigi Mangione. So now we know what she is. She's a progressive.
So you're calling Luigi Mangione, the guy did a natty or not on, the guy that ended somebody else's lifespan, let's call it like that. You're calling him a bae, as in some hot dude. Like, I don't care what that guy did. You're not sitting there calling bro bae in public to other people. Oh yeah, you're so much hotter than my husband. What a stud. I wish I had him.
Do you want to start getting ready when I get
He's not yelling at all. He says, do you want to start getting ready?
back?
Don't yell at me like that.
I apologize, but
I apologize. What?
would you like to start getting ready when I get back?
No.
Anyone that thinks that your woman wants you to apologize for situations like this when you clearly did nothing wrong, there's the door. You might be thinking, no, but happy wife, happy life. Even if I didn't do anything, I'm going to apologize. I'm going to be the bigger person, apologize. No, you need to break up and move on. I'm not kidding. You can't just allow them to do this. It'll start slow. Give them an inch and eventually they will take a mile. They will continue to push you beyond what you're willing to accept, only marginally, until eventually your life, it's no longer left.
We're these fucking red pill podcast guys, like,
Okay.
when they tell you something, when they ask you to jump, you say how high. You're still not a man either way. Do you see what I'm saying? Like, you're still a little bitch beta boy doing whatever these fucking men tell you. Why are you mad at us?
Notice how she says, why are you mad at us? She's trying to empower all women, to put all women in the same category. She's trying to play the woman card. I'm a weak, vulnerable woman, and these men, these Andrew Tates and Myrons, perhaps Coach Greg's. And so what she's trying to say is these men are misogynists. They have toxic masculinity, and they need to be put down. We are feminists. We are all powerful, and men need to simp for us, but they don't use those exact words. They try to make it look like we're bad people and that we should somehow do their bidding. And that if we don't go along with it, then we should be canceled because, hey, virtue signaling, saying I'm a woman, the big bad wolf Coach Greg said this about me, it happens all of the time. You have no idea. And the worst of it, many of you literally fall for this shit.
Are you mad if me and my husband are cool with each other, if we both make jokes at each other's expense?
It's not the same. He is the leader. He is the comedian. That is his career. You are not. You are not. Okay? Not the same at all. At all.
The difference is my husband will go on stage and say whatever the fuck he wants about me.
And he does it professionally and built a huge platform by doing it.
You're not a comedian. This is how he makes a living. You're disparaging your husband. You're not making equal jokes that you both enjoy, that you both want to happen, that's increasing the success of your relationship. This is hurting your relationship. When he makes jokes, it's improving the relationship. Do you see the difference?
She went ahead and said, oh, we got like 37,000 views and our video, still 1.3K subscribers.
This is all for a channel that has 1.3 thousand followers. 1.3. Oh, you can't look at me till you get 1 million followers on Instagram? You have 1.3 thousand followers on your podcast.
Niggas are clicking on this to make fun of you, bro. Click. No watch time.
Yeah, in case you don't know how YouTube works, it's not just how many views you get, it's the viewing time. That's why, for example, when all these channels post a bunch of shorts and it looks like they're getting a lot of views and they're getting a lot of followers, but it's shorts. They're watching 30 seconds. Do you know how much money you get paid for watching 15 and 30-second videos instead of compared to 10-minute videos? Sometimes it's 500 times more money for a long-form video than a short. And so when you see a channel has 7 or 8 million followers, but it's all shorts, in comparison than long-form views are golden. They're at least 100x better than short form. And so just because said influencer has more subs, it doesn't mean anything. It doesn't mean they're making a lot of money. Making a channel based on shorts because you made a funny face or you said something hilarious and you got 100 million views, it doesn't mean you're making any money.
No one has anything to say. It's like, oh my God, it's so funny, it's so relatable. But then I come on TikTok and I make jokes and now you have a fucking problem?
No, it's not jokes, bro. You are embarrassing, man.
If there was any hope in saving this marriage, it would have been leading with an apology, having empathy, understanding that what her words are doing is extremely damaging. But the fact that she's doubling down, that is the nail in the coffin. And so this marriage, it's over. And so my advice to Akash is to cash out. Get rid of all your finances, put it in your parents' name, get out of there, and then apply for divorce. And while you're at it, Akash, please go and purchase Turk Platinum, Turk Builder Max, and of course, get the friggin' cookbook and become a Chad. Now, you're already a funny guy, you're famous, you have money, but what you can work on is the looks maxing. You can get more jacked and have less body fat. And so the next woman that you're going to meet, you can present the best self forward. Hey, it'll be a funny story. Remember that time when I was with that woman and I was tricked and so on? Never again. And so you will quickly learn that there are far better women out there. Wishing you the best of luck. Subscribe, click the bell button, comment to boost the
Când se face 12 fix, vreau scenarii XXX, din spate și lateral, din față după deasupra. Că îmi place să mă fut cu talent de Kama Sutra. Mi-am pus tocuri înalte și o fustă scurtă. Vrei să mă vezi pe spate și apoi pe burtă. Dă-mi bice peste cur și palme peste față. Sunt domnișoara ta cea mai perversă zdreanță. Scuipă-mă în gură și bagă-mi mai tare. Vreau să tremur toată, din cap până în picioare. Sunt transpirată toată, poți să-mi spui escorta. Dă-mi pula mea mai tare că nu dai măta. Scuipă-mă în gură și bagă-mi mai tare. Vreau să tremur toată, din cap până în picioare. Sunt transpirată toată, poți să-mi spui escorta. Dă-mi pula mea mai tare că nu dai măta. Și vorbește-n vulgar. Stai bine pe pulă, nu e mică nici de cal. Ți s-a umflat vena și te doare capul, că m-ai ascultat și ai dat ca disperatul. Mi-am pus tocuri înalte și o fustă scurtă. Vrei să mă vezi pe spate și apoi pe burtă. Dă-mi bice peste cur și palme peste față. Sunt domnișoara ta cea mai perversă zdreanță. Scuipă-mă în gură și bagă-mi mai tare. Vreau să tremur toată, din cap până în picioare. Sunt transpirată toată, poți să-mi spui escorta. Dă-mi pula mea mai tare că nu dai măta. Scuipă-mă în gură și bagă-mi mai tare. Vreau să tremur toată, din cap până în picioare. Sunt transpirată toată, poți să-mi spui escorta. Dă-mi pula mea mai tare că nu dai măta. Cash is something else, bro. Sunt supărată rău, mă simt ca într-o celulă. În camera mea că am mare chef de pulă. Am dat niște mesaje și m-am străduit ca proasta. Că unul nu răspunde, pe altul nu lasă nevasta. Altul e la muncă, celălalt cu pula lungă. E vai morțilu și n-are cu ce să ajungă. Îl mai aveam pe unul, dar cred că m-a blocat. Că data trecută l-am legat și l-am schipat. Fumez un cui și nu știu cui să-i scriu că s-a nimănui. Vreau să mă fut, dar n-are cine să poată să mă termine. Fumez un cui și nu știu cui să-i scriu că s-a nimănui. Vreau să mă fut, dar n-are cine să poată să mă termine. Iarăși n-am noroc și mă jur că nu mai pot. Mă urc în mașină și mă duc până la sex shop să-mi iau un dildo și două vibratoare, niște lubrifianți și câteva bile anale. După mă bag în cadă și mă gândesc la lăbuș. Ăla de șa la labă când făceam prostii în duș. Simt că explodez, la pizdă sunt ocean. Mi-am dat drumul tare, a sărit și pe tavan. Fumez un cui și nu știu cui să-i scriu că s-a nimănui. Vreau să mă fut, dar n-are cine să poată să mă termine. Fumez un cui și nu știu cui să-i scriu că s-a nimănui. Vreau să mă fut, dar n-are cine să poată să mă termine.
Told you. Cash is something else, bro.
Punem coca pe cur și trage că e bună. Trage, trage, trage cum trag eu din pulă. Hai nu mai fi cu minte că ești prea banal. Îmi place tare în pizdă, dar îmi place și anal. Ți-ai dat drumul pe mine și este fierbinte. Îmi place stropită, nu sunt deloc cu minte. Haide încă o dată și nu o dăm bară. După altă muie îmi zici, doamna profesoară. Ține-mă alesă că nu sunt fată bună. Toți copiii tăi ei am acum în gură. Ce-mi place pula, pula de golan. Am înghițit odată și s-au dat pe tobogan. Ține-mă alesă că nu sunt fată bună. Toți copiii tăi ei am acum în gură. Ce-mi place place pula de golan. Am înghițit odată și s-au dat pe tobogan. Ești puternic dezvoltat, mai futut în așa hal. Zici că am băgat în mine o mare pulă de cal. Mi-ai dat-o pe birou, pe pat și pe covor. Dacă nu-mi dai pulă, baby, simt că mor. Ți-ai dat drumul pe mine și este fierbinte. Îmi place stropită, nu sunt deloc cu minte. Haide încă o dată și nota în bară. După altă muie îmi zici, doamna profesoară. Ține-mă lesă că nu sunt fată bună. Toți copiii tăi ei am acum în gură. Ce-mi place pula de golan. Am înghițit odată și s-au dat pe tobogan. Ține-mă în lesă că nu sunt fată bună. Toți copiii tăi ei am acum în gură. Ce-mi place pula de golan. Am înghițit odată și s-au dat pe tobogan. Cash is something else, bro. Știu că ești ocupat, dar de ce te-am sunat? Vrei să vii la mine să ne fugărim prin pat?
Am o întâlnire, dar o să sun acum. Să o anulez și după pornesc la drum.
Bine, baby meu, să nu mă tragi pe sfoară. Te aștept în dormitor, în sutin și în pista goală.
Vorbește-vă frumos că te întreci cu gluma. Mi-ai zis două vorbe și mi s-a sculat pula.
Ce nebun ești, honey, lipsa ta mă-ndoaie. Abia aștept să ajung să-ți dau limbi pe coaie.
Fătaci morții mătii, nu mai fi muistă. Că și așa sunt fier și am mare chef de pistă.
Mă bucur de ce spui, deja mă apucă frica. Sunt ironică când mă mănâncă păsărica.
Ascultă la băiatul, ia-o ușor și las-o. Îți dau daună totală și nici măcar nu ai casco.
Ce glumă bună să nu o mai faci. Vino în sânge odată, vreau să mă satisfaci.
Stai în pula mea că sunt la benzinărie. Să iau maratoane să vezi mare șmecherie.
Lasă-le în slobos, toți coleu nu face griji. Vino mai repede că sudă toată la mii.
O fă că vin acum, stai așa să parchezi. Și să moară mie de nu te terorizezi.
Îți las ușa deschisă, mai Osama Bin Laden. Te aștept să te fut, în păcate să cădem.
O am tare ca piatră, mă jur pe toți sfinții. Că dacă le iei în gură o să ți se miște dinții.
Nu mai face glume că încep să am regrete. Și apropo de asta vezi că am de mult fațete.
Mă fut în gura ta, hai pregătește-te. Că-ți bag pula în gură de scot fațetele.
Nu mă mai amenința, hai ajuns deja. Bine ai venit în mine, te pup iubirea mea. I told you, cash is something else, bro. Fute-mă și bate-mă, dă-mi palme și ia-mă, mă. Nu fă sânge pe nebun, nu cumva să pleci fără să-mi dau drumul. Fute-mă și bate-mă, dă-mi palme și ia-mă, mă. Nu fă sânge pe nebun, nu cumva să pleci fără să-mi dau drumul. Cu chiloții tanga, fără chiloții tanga. Văd că îți dai laba și eu ți lângă-langa. E semisculată și eu sunt încordată. Poate nu se întărește și eu vreau pe toată. Fute-mă și bate-mă, dă-mi palme și ia-mă, mă. Nu fă sânge pe nebun, nu cumva să pleci fără să-mi dau drumul. Fute-mă și bate-mă, dă-mi palme și ia-mă, mă. Nu fă sânge pe nebun, nu cumva să pleci fără să-mi dau drumul. De 2-3 ori pe zi fac muie și alte prostii. Îmi place să simt în mine că e bine, bine, bine. Dacă obosești, promit să mai rămân. Ador când mă lingi pe sfarguri și sunt. Nu te lăsa, honey, nu fi băiat rău. Că orice ai face eu, tot stau pe capul tău. Fute-mă, fute-mă, fute-mă și bate-mă, dă-mi palme și ia-mă. Nu fă sânge pe nebun, nu cumva să pleci fără să-mi dau drumul. Fute-mă, fute-mă, fute-mă și bate-mă, dă-mi palme și ia-mă. Nu fă sânge pe nebun, nu cumva să pleci fără să-mi dau drumul.
Cash is something else, bro.
Ia-mă, du-mă în parcare și aprinde-ți o țigară, dă și pantalonii jos, să ți-l suc, nu fi dubios. Du-mă și ia-mă în pulă și fă-mi control la dantură, dă-ți drumul ca un erou și o să scuip sub torpedo. Intru pe aplicație, dau comandă de mașină, cardul l-am pierdut când am tras o linie fină, dar o să mă descurc că sunt fată deșteaptă. Am pușcărie în mine și o să mai fac o faptă. Nu am cash deloc, dar pot să-l înghip pe tot. Ăsta-i mesajul meu pentru tipul de pe Bolt. Îi dau și 5 steluțe și recenzii top. A venit într-un minut și băiatul e potop. Ia-mă, du-mă în parcare și aprinde-ți o țigare, dă și pantalonii jos, să ți-l suc, nu fi dubios. Du-mă și ia-mă în pulă și fă-mi control la dantură, dă-ți drumul ca un erou și o să scuip sub torpedo. Văd că e automat, mergi că te dai pe pistă. Hai repede iubire, bagăm degetul în pistă. Vrei să fii serios, nu știi să te prefaci. După cursa asta cred că o să te retragi. Nu am cash deloc, dar pot să-l înghip pe tot. Ăsta-i mesajul meu pentru tipul de pe Bolt. Îi dau și 5 steluțe și recenzii top, că a venit într-un minut și băiatul e potop. Ia-mă, du-mă în parcare și aprinde-ți o țigare, dă și pantalonii jos, să ți-l suc, nu fi dubios. Du-mă și ia-mă în pulă și fă-mi control la dantură, dă-ți drumul ca un erou și o să scuip sub torpedo.
I told you. Cash is something else, bro.
Sunt că stârfă și îmi place în pulă. Seara dăm la moie, nu-mi spune noapte bună. Vreau să-ți înghis lobozul că am roșu în gât. Dă-mi palme peste cur și vorbește-mi urât. Ce-mi place capră, ce-mi place capră. Dacă ți-ai dat drumul, mai bagă-mi-l odată. Mintea doar la tine fuge și mă gândesc cum te-aș suge. Dacă-ți pasă de mine, să te duci să-ți pui bile. Mintea doar la tine fuge și mă gândesc cum te-aș suge. I-am pus și piercing în limbă, pe capul pulii se plimbă. Leagă-mă la ochi, de mâini și de picioare, înainte să încep, bagă 2 maratoane. Știi că sunt nebună și după tine sunt fiartă. Vreau să-ți simt pula tare ca o piatră. Ce-mi place capră, ce-mi place capră. Dacă ți-ai dat drumul, mai bagă-mi-l odată. Mintea doar la tine fuge și mă gândesc cum te-aș suge. Dacă-ți pasă de mine, să te duci să-ți pui bile. Mintea doar la tine fuge și mă gândesc cum te-aș suge. Mi-am pus și piercing în limbă, pe capul pulii se plimbă.
Cash is something else, bro.
Te vezi mare pulă, dar ești doar un cățeluș. Ești fier când te fugi și te suc de ăsta rochii. Nu zice că nu-ți place, dă-te morții mătii. Aoleu, măi, mamă, ce burtică de tătic. Vreau lapte de pulă, haide baby, știi ce zic. Chiar dacă sunt mică, regula se aplică. Am mare foc pe pulă și pe limbi în păsărică. Cauți dream să merg, push, 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 push. Să găsesc un lache și să ne futem în duș. Tăgădăm, 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 bam, bam. Ador să fac muie și sexul anal. Cauți dream să merg, push, 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 push. Să găsesc un lache și să ne futem în duș. Tăgădăm, 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 bam, bam. Ador să fac muie și sexul anal. Eu tăgădăm, push, push. Te țin prizonier că am făcut școala la ruș. Te torturez că am o recuzită cool. Că tu și pici în timp ce te ling în cur. Aoleu, măi, mamă, ce burtică de tătică. Vreau lapte de pulă, haide baby, știi ce zic. Chiar dacă sunt mică, regulă se aplică. Am mare foc pe pulă și pe limbi în păsărică. Cauți vreau să merg, push, 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 push. Să găsesc un lache și să ne futem în duș. Tăgădăm, 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 bam, bam. Ador să fac muie și sexul anal. Cauți vreau să merg, push, 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 push. Să găsesc un lache și să ne futem în duș. Tăgădăm, 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 bam, bam. Ador să fac muie și sexul anal.
I've told you.
Cash salted.
Cash is something else, bro.
Cash is something else, bro. Plăcerea mea nevinovată bagă în mine toată. Vreau să te simt cel mai bine și pe mine și în mine. Plăcerea mea nevinovată bagă în mine toată. Vreau să te simt cel mai bine și pe mine și în mine. Femeia este bună atunci când este pornistă. Nu e de ajuns să ai BBL și pistă. Dacă nu-și dă drumul repede este grav. Se șmecherește prostul și uită că e un sclav. Dacă asculti piesa asta, du-te acasă la al tău și fute să-i sară ochii, fute-l rău. Ia-i pula în gură, uită-te în ochii lui, că îi are rău și zici că a fumat un cui. Plăcerea mea nevinovată bagă în mine toată. Vreau să te simt cel mai bine și pe mine și în mine. Plăcerea mea nevinovată bagă în mine toată. Vreau să te simt cel mai bine și pe mine și în mine. Pedepsește-mă o noapte, vreau să fiu aosul tău. Îmbrăcat în doctoriță, îți fac un consult cadou. Dezbracă-te de tot, te analizez total. În primul rând la coaie și în al doilea la ciocan. Dacă asculti piesa asta, du-te acasă la al tău și fute-l să-i sară ochii, fute-l rău. Ia-i pula în gură, uită-te în ochii lui, că îi are rău și zici că a fumat un cui. Plăcerea mea nevinovată bagă în mine toată. Vreau să te simt cel mai bine și pe mine și în mine. Plăcerea mea nevinovată bagă în mine toată. Vreau să te simt cel mai bine și pe mine și în mine.
I told you. Cash is something else, bro.
Cash is something else, bro. Invită-mă la ceai, scoate-mă la cafea. Vorbește-mi urât, zi totul fără perdea. Spune-mi ce mi-ai face dacă aș fi a ta. Nu fi rușinos. Văd în ochii tăi doar filme pentru adulți, dar să-mi facă față nu au putut prea mulți. Și-am făcut spate doggy, stai de rămân via. Și în secunda 2 le-am înmuiat jucării. Arzi mai ceva ca mijloc cu verii. Ia-o ușor, baby, că vin pompierii. Miruja încins că și sarea și piperul. Sunt tu de toată a venit pompierul. Arzi mai ceva ca mijloc vrei doar o aventură. Ce vreau eu îți zic, să mă iei direct în pulă. Vorbesc eu pentru tine ca mă simt trasă pe sfoară, că la cât ești de frumos să mor dacă ai vrăjeală. În ochii tăi doar filme pentru adulți, dar să-mi facă față nu au putut prea mulți. Dar-mi focus bate doggy style de România și în secunda doi le-am înmuiat jucării. Are-ți mai ceva ca în mijlocul verii. Ia-o ușor, baby, că vin pompierii. Miroja încins că și sarea și piperul. Asentul de toată a venit pompierul. Are-ți mai ceva ca în mijlocul verii. Ia-o ușor, baby, că vin pompierii. Miroja încins că și sarea și piperul. Asentul de toată a venit pompierul. I told you, cash is something else, bro. Cash is something else, bro. Cox, 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 bagă cox, cox, cox. Fute-mă și bate-mă, mai ceva ca la box. Ia-mă la capace ca băieții din comando. Mi-ai băgat pula în pizdă și te ajuta Ronaldo. Cox, 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 bagă cox, cox, cox. Fute-mă și bate-mă, mai ceva ca la box. Ia-mă la capace ca băieții din comando. Mi-ai băgat pula în pizdă și te ajuta Ronaldo. Ești prea misterios, te uiți și nu zici nimic. Și în secunda 2 simt degetul pe lindic. Începe să mă ia cu transpirații, că ești genul ăla ce oferă satisfacții. Îmi place de tine, zici că ai luat-o pe ciuperci. Ai halucinații, văd că pe balcon ți-o freci. Îmi faci semn să vin cu încă două cuie. Unul tu, unul eu, în timp ce îmi dai la muie. Cox, 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 bagă cox, cox, cox. Fute-mă și bate-mă, mai ceva ca la box. Ia-mă la capace ca băieții din comando. Mi-ai băgat pula în pizdă și te ajuta Ronaldo. Cox, 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 bagă cox, cox, cox. Fute-mă și bate-mă, mai ceva ca la box. Ia-mă la capace ca băieții din comando. Mi-ai băgat pula în pizdă și te ajuta Ronaldo. Am pe mine linii, haide trage de pe cur. Stau bine pe forme și nu am fizic de jnur. Hai bagă un geu, hai bagă un geu, împărțit în pliculețe la mine în decolteu. Îmi place de tine, zici că ai luat-o pe ciuperci. Hai halucinați-vă că pe balcon ți-o freci. Îmi faci semn să vin cu încă două cuie. Unul tu, unul eu, în timp ce îmi dai la muie. Cox, cox, bagă cox, cox, cox. Cox, 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 bagă cox, cox, cox. Fute-mă și bate-mă, mai ceva ca la box. Ia-mă la capace ca băieții din comando. Mi-ai băgat pula în pizdă și te ajuta Ronaldo. I've told you, cash is something else, bro. Am uitat de vibrator, vai mamă ce bărbat. Mi-a băgat pula în pizdă pe mașina de spălat. Abia ieșisem din cadă și m-a luat direct pe sus. După am stat în genunchi, pe zoom m-am pus. Îmi place când e tare și o simt în mine. Mâncați-a șlobozul că-i ca mierea de albine. Dulce, lipițios, lipițios și dulce. Sunt fata ta cu minte și fata ta suge. Îmi place când e tare și o simt în mine. Mâncați-a șlobozul că-i ca mierea de albine. Dulce, lipițios, lipițios și dulce. Sunt fata ta cu minte și fata ta suge. Pula nu știe carte, pista nu vrea să învețe. E o vorbă veche, fortor să se răsfețe. Să simtă plăcere și unul și altul. Încă o dată, baby, și o să rupem patul. Îmi place când e tare și o simt în mine. Mâncați-aș lobosul că-i ca mierea de albine. Dulce lipicios, lipicios și dulce. Sunt fata ta cu minte și fata ta suge. Îmi place când e tare și o simt în mine. Mâncați-aș lobozul că-i ca mierea de albine. Dulce lipicios, lipicios și dulce. Sunt fata ta cu minte și fata ta suge. Îmi place când e tare și o simt în mine. Mâncați-aș lobozul că-i ca mierea de albine. Dulce lipicios, lipicios și dulce. Sunt fata ta cu minte și fata ta suge. Cash is something else, bro. Cash is something else, bro. Tucuri de 20 ți le pun direct pe piept. Că să moară măta dacă poți să mai aștept. Ți-am bătut apropouri și n-ai făcut nimic. Îți pun pizda pe față, ai ce te-am lăchit. Ești purtător ilegal de pulă bună. Eu vreau să fiu flașcă, ca după furtună. Sper să începi tu să-mi arăți că ai tupeu. Dar dacă nu încep, o să te termin eu. Băbălău rău, băbălău rău. În fiecare zi stai după curul meu. Mă scos peste tot și mă plimb că ai bani mult. Scuze iubirea mea, dar să mor de știi să fuți. Iau băbălău rău, băbălău rău. În fiecare zi stai după curul meu. Mă scos peste tot și mă plimb că ai bani mult. Scuze iubirea mea, dar să mor de știi să fuți. Poate sunt eu perversă și am alte așteptări. De când vreau să mă fuți, am fumat 15 țigări. Mi-am dat sutienul jos și am rămas în chiloți. Ori ești rușinos, ori să dai la buci, nu poți. Ești purtător ilegal de pulă bună. Eu vreau să fiu flașcă, ca după furtună. Sper să începi tu să-mi arăți că ai tupeu. Dar dacă nu încep, o să te termin eu. Băbălău rău, băbălău rău. În fiecare zi stai după curul meu. Mă scos peste tot și mă plimb că ai bani mult. Scuze iubirea mea, dar să mor de știi să fuți. Iau băbălău rău, băbălău rău. În fiecare zi stai după curul meu. Mă scos peste tot și mă plimb că ai bani mult. Scuze iubirea mea, dar să mor de știi să fuți. I told you.
Cash is something else, bro.
Cash is something else, bro. Cash is something else, bro. Cash is something else, bro. Am primit pe mail aseară invitație de la șeful să mă duc la el acasă. Că nevasta i-a luat cheful. Are chef de muie, nebunul, nebunul. Eu sunt numărul 1, dar numărul 1. Cred că abia așteaptă să-și dea drumul în mine. Știe că fac sală și am nevoie de proteine. În 15 minute ajung. Bossule, stai liniștit. Mă urc în mașină și vin să te înghit. Hai, șefule, deși nu te opri. Hai, șefule, că mi-ar de prostii. Pune-mă cum vrei, nu contează scenariul. Dăm cu pula pe limbă dacă tot nu-mi dai salariul. Hai, șefule, deși nu te opri. Hai, șefule, că mi-ar de prostii. Pune-mă cum vrei, nu contează scenariul. Dăm cu pula pe limbă dacă tot nu-mi dai salariul. Îmi pun pantofi cu toc și plec doar într-un body. Am paltonul roșu că-s prințesa Bloody. Îl zgâri pe tot corpul până îi dă sângelele. Când se uită în oglindă să-mi vadă urmele. Sunt o nenorocită, îi suc pula lui bossul. Lui bossul meu frumos, lui aia și-n gură slobosul. Bossul chiparos, sau mă bate nemilosul. Îmi dă flecme pe muie și eu îi flecmez pulosul. Hai, șefule, deși nu te opri. Hai, șefule, că mi-ar de prostii. Pune-mă cum vrei, nu contează scenariul. Dăm cu pula pe limbă dacă tot nu-mi dai salariul. Hai, șefule, deși nu te opri. Hai, șefule, că mi-ar de prostii. Pune-mă cum vrei, nu contează scenariul. Dăm cu pula pe limbă dacă tot nu-mi dai salariul. I've told you. Cash is something else, bro.
something else, bro. Cash is something new. Îmi place pula, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, șefa la femei, 7, 8, 9, sunt tu de parcă plouă, care mă ascultați, eu o să vă suc și vouă. Îmi place pula, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, șefa la femei, 7, 8, 9, sunt tu de parcă plouă, care mă ascultați, eu o să vă suc și vouă. Puțină scorțișoară și puțin ginseng, ți-au făcut pula tare, dar eu vreau gangbang. Cheamă-ți prietenii cu pulile sculate, să-mi rupă pis dacă eu nu sunt ca toate. Vreau să dau 2 labe, să iau 2 puli în gură, una-n pizdă, una în curcă, la sex n-am măsură. Iartă-mă iubire, dar știi că sunt mai nebună, nu poate să-mi ajungă o singură pulă. Îmi place pula, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, șefa la femei, 7, 8, 9, sunt tu de parcă plouă, care mă ascultați, o să vă suc și vouă. Îmi place pula, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, șefa la femei, 7, 8, 9, sunt tu de parcă plouă, care mă ascultați, o să vă suc și vouă. Faceți ce vreți cu mine, urcați-mă pe fereastră, dați-mi muie cu toții că vreau să fiu sclava voastră. Rupeți pula în mine, Doamne, ce-mi trece prin gând, mi-aș dori să mă futeți până când încep să plâng. Vreau să dau 2 labe, să iau 2 puli în gură, una-n pizdă, una în curcă, la sex n-am măsură. Iartă-mă iubire, dar știi că sunt mai nebună, nu pot să-mi ajungă o singură pulă. Îmi place pula, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, șefa la femei, 7, 8, 9, sunt tu de parcă plouă, care mă ascultați, o să vă suc și vouă. Îmi place pula, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, șefa la femei, 7, 8, 9, sunt tu de parcă plouă, care mă ascultați, o să vă suc și vouă. M-ai lăsat fără cuvinte, eu cred că ai luat pastile, că să moară să facă de n-ai de-a prea tare în mine. Nu, nu mai simt pizda, că am băgat carne crudă, sincer aș mai băga, că-s din ce în ce mai udă. Iar am ridicat piciorul să te joci cu vibratorul și încurci în păsărică, că sunt o perversă mică. Trăiesc pentru pula ta, fute-mă iubirea mea, vreau să-mi dai la muie, că atunci încep să fiu excitată, ador să mă nec. Trăiesc pentru pula ta, fute-mă iubirea mea, vreau să-mi dai la muie, că atunci încep să fiu excitată, ador să mă nec. Îți place când mă vezi pe cearceaf dezbrăcată, m-ai făcut toată noaptea și văd că mai vrei odată. N-am cum să te refuz, chiar dacă-s extenuată, mai stau puțin pe spate și după ți-o înghit pe toate. Am ridicat piciorul să te joci cu vibratorul și încurci în păsărică, că sunt o perversă mică. Trăiesc pentru pula ta, fute-mă iubirea mea, vreau să-mi dai la muie, că atunci încep să fiu excitată, ador să mă nec. Trăiesc pentru pula ta, fute-mă iubirea mea, vreau să-mi dai la muie, că atunci încep să fiu excitată, ador să mă nec. Fiu excitată, ador să mă nec. La da 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 da. Cash is something else, bro. Ah, le le le, ah, le le la, fut-o pe prințesa ta. Au, 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 dă tare cu biciul, mă mănâncă-n cură, tu bagă-mi cariciul. Ah, le le le, ah, le le la, fut-o pe prințesa ta. Au, 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 dă tare cu biciul, mă mănâncă-n cură, tu bagă-mi cariciul. Tatuată pe picior, cum tigru malaezian, vrea să simtă buzele și limbuța de golan. Urcă, 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 baby, lasă la o parte frica, că dacă ai trecut de tigru poți să mângâi păsărica. Sărută-mă și lasă-mă îmbătată de sex, că sunt o perversă și tu un pervers. Durex cu banane, honey, ești prea loc, o să știi că mie îmi place doar mirosul de coco. Ah, le le le, ah, pe prințesa ta. Au, 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 dă tare cu biciu. Mă mănânc în gură, tu bagă-mi cariciu. Ah, lelele, la fut-o pe prințesa ta. Au, 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 dă tare cu biciu. Mă mănânc în gură, tu bagă-mi cariciu. Tatuată și pe cur cu fața lui Harley Quinn, care îți face cu ochiul când intru puțin. Ți-am dat contra mea, dar muie și mare flegmă pe ochi. Ori ai numai gândurile, ori mai scuipate de ochi. Sărută-mă și lasă-mă îmbătată de sex, că sunt o perversă și tu un pervers. Dureți cu banane, honey, ești prea loc. O să știi că mie îmi place doar mirosul de coco. Ah, lelele, la fut-o pe prințesa ta. Au, 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 dă tare cu biciu. Mă mănânc în cură, tu bagă-mi cariciu. Ah, lelele, la fut-o pe prințesa ta. Au, 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 dă tare cu biciu. Mă mănânc în cură, tu bagă-mi cariciu.
I've told you, cash is something else, bro.
Cash is something else, bro. Nu sunt ieftină deloc, dar să moară mama mea. De nu sunt foc pe tine și pe mașina ta. M-aș întinde în spate să te fut ca o zdranță, dar îți fac o muie, poți să-ți dai drumul pe față. Văleleu, are bile și ceceu. Sincer mi-a păsat că ești armăsar printre cai de pasat. Turbo, turbo, baby, du-mă unde vrei. Dacă m-a fost bine, totul e ok. Turbo, turbo, baby, nu o să regret. Tu rupe pizda mine, urcă-mă pe pereți. Turbo, turbo, baby, du-mă unde vrei. Dacă m-a fost bine, totul e ok. Turbo, turbo, baby, nu o să regret. Tu rupe pizda mine, urcă-mă pe pereți. Îți plac buzele mele și de sus și de jos. Cum mă uit la tine, cum vă puțin de slobos. Pe capul pulii, honey, vino să ți-l iau. Ți-l mai frec puțin și după ești ceau. Văleleu, are bile și ceceu. Sincer mi-a păsat că ești armăsar printre cai de pasat. Turbo, turbo, baby, du-mă unde vrei. Dacă m-a fost bine, totul e ok. Turbo, turbo, baby, nu o să regret.
But the essence of revolutionizing space travel is reusability. If you throw the rocket away every time, the cost of access to space is extremely high. With respect to electric cars, there weren't any electric cars when we started making them, really. You couldn't buy any, to the best of my knowledge. With Tesla, we wanted to make electric cars compelling and affordable. That was the goal. With respect to humanoid robotics, there are no useful humanoid robots at this point. There are sort of gimmicks, but there are no actually useful humanoid robots. I think Tesla's going to make the first actually useful humanoid robots. And this will be quite a revolution. And I think something that everyone will want. Because I always think of like, who wouldn't want their own personal C-3PO R2-D2?
Oh, yeah?
Of course. Everyone would want one, right? And then there would be many in industry providing products and services. This is why I say that humanoid robots will be the biggest industry, or the biggest product ever. Bigger than cell phones or anything else, because everyone's going to want one, and or maybe more than one, and there'll be many in industry.
I just want R2D2 in C-3PO's body.
Well, I mean, a humanoid robot will be better than R2D2 and C-3PO combined times 10. And people often talk about eliminating poverty and that kind of thing, but really, how long have they been talking about that? There's lots of talk. There's lots of NGOs sort of trying to do these things, but really not succeeding. The evidence speaks for itself. AI and humanoid robots will actually eliminate poverty. And Tesla won't be the only one that makes them. I think Tesla will pioneer this, but there will be many other companies that make humanoid robots. But there is only basically one way to make everyone wealthy, and that is AI and robotics.
And we can't talk about robotics without AI factories. And yesterday was such a historic day
for the two nations, but also for all of us, where we celebrate the AI strategic partnership with the U.S., signed, witnessed by the Honorable President and His Royal Highness, about how we are committing our capital, energy, land to energize the AI US ecosystem, to be able to build inference node, training nodes, and to be the most AI-enabled nation. With that announcement, tell me what's next in AI factories, Jensen?
There's a beautiful story about how Saudi Arabia is building AI refineries and now building AI factories, or oil refineries to AI factories.
I love that.
I've said that AI is an infrastructure, and the reason for that, of course, we understand AI from the perspective of the technology and how it's revolutionizing every industry. Digital intelligence, of course, has applications into every field. And so it's going to be used by every company, every industry, every country. In that way, it's foundational, and therefore it's part of infrastructure. What is new about AI from a computer science perspective is that the way computing was done in the past was largely retrieval-based computing. Somebody typed in a story, or somebody created a piece of art, or came up with 4 versions of a digital ad, or it's all pre-built by somebody, which is then using a system to retrieve the appropriate version for you. It's a retrieval-based computing model. Hadoop and many of the frameworks and operating systems of the past, all designed to retrieve the appropriate information for you. But today, software is going to be generated in real time. It's generative. Based on the context, based on the circumstance, based on who you are, based on the problem you asked, based on your prompt, it will generate unique content for you. Every single time for everybody, it's unique. When you use Grok, every time you use it is different. Just based on the based on the prompt that you give it and based on the circumstance. It used to be retrieval based. Today it's generative. And if it's generative, every time is different, then you need AI factories all over the world to generate the content in real time, which is the reason why you need AI factories. And this is a unique way of doing computation, but the benefit, of course, is that everything isn't preconceived and pre-documented, and it's contextually sensible and therefore intelligent.
So AI factories and robotics, and we heard it yesterday from His Royal Highness, his vision, how to augment our workforce with roughly tens of millions of robotics to be able to infuse the next wave of productivity and progress. But this scares a lot of folks here when it comes to the future of jobs. So let's hear about your thoughts, Elon and Jensen, on that.
Sure. Well, say in the long term, where will things end up? Long term, I don't know what long term is. Maybe it's 10, 20 years, something like that. For me, that's long term. My prediction is that work will be optional.
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 We'll take that.
Yeah. I mean, it'll be like playing sports or a video game or something like that. If you want to work, in the same way, like you can go to the store and just buy some vegetables, or you could grow vegetables in your backyard. It's much harder to grow vegetables in your backyard, but some people still do it because they like growing vegetables. That will be what work is like, optional. And between now and then, there's actually a lot of work to get to that point. Mm-hmm. And I always recommend people read Ian Banks' culture books to get a sense for what a probable positive AI future is like. And interestingly, in those books, money doesn't exist. It's kind of interesting. And my guess is, if you go out long enough, assuming there's a continued improvement in AI and robotics, which this seems likely, the money will stop being relevant at some point in the future. Now, there will still be constraints on power, like electricity and mass. The fundamental physics elements will still be constraints. But I think at some point, currency becomes irrelevant.
Jensen, any thoughts?
By the way, the NVIDIA earnings call is later today.
And by the way, since currency is relevant.
Cheers.
Elon just wants to share with you some breaking news. The two of us who like to share some breaking news. Let's see. I would say there's different horizons you could look at. Everybody's jobs will be different. I think that's for sure. How the students learn will be different. How people do their work will be different, obviously, because a lot of the things that we do mundanely or arduously or very difficultly are going to be done very simply. And so we're going to be more productive from that sense. One of the things that I will say is that if your life becomes more productive, and if the things that you're doing with great difficulty become simpler, it is very likely, because you have so many ideas, you'll have more time to go pursue things. It is my guess that Elon will be busier as a result of AI. I'm going to be busier as a result of AI. And the reason for that is because we have so many ideas we want to pursue, so many things that we still have in our backlog inside our company that we can go pursue. If we were more productive, we can get to those things faster. And so in the near term, I would say that there's every evidence that we will be more productive and yet still be busier because we have so many ideas. One thing that I will say, give you some evidence, is that, and I was just telling Elon about this earlier, radiology, for example, has largely been converted to AI-driven radiology, and there's some really great companies doing that. And the surprising thing is the prediction that all radiologists would be the first jobs to go was exactly the opposite. The trend shows that there are more radiologists being hired now as a result of AI. And the reason for that, if you take a step back, it's because the goal of a radiologist is not to study the images. The goal of a radiologist is to diagnose a disease. Now the studying of the images became so productive, they could study more images, study more modalities, spend more time with the patients. And as a result, they were actually accepting more patients. We're doing more radiology all around the world. We're doing a better job with diagnosing disease. And so that's kind of the near-term outcome of AI and productivity. And we'll see what happens long-term. You know, when currency doesn't matter anymore, just, let me know right before.
You'll see it coming. You'll see it coming.
We text often.
Yeah, we do.
Yeah, just text it out. Yeah, let me know.
I kind of agree with both of you, because if you look at every technological trend, every general purpose technology has been net new positive for the globe, for humanity, and so forth. With you two cases,
Your Excellency, I think it's precisely the reason for that is because all the great ideas from innovators like Elon, that you have so many good ideas.
As well.
Yeah, well, thank you.
So let me share with you two stories from two Saudi innovators in collaboration with a lot of the great work that NVIDIA does. So one of them is Professor Omar Yagi, who's the first American Saudi to win a Nobel Prize in creating new chemistry. And the way he has done that, he has leveraged your AI accelerators and models like Grok to be able to create new chemistry when it comes to metal organic frameworks. Those are metal ions that are positively charged with organic linkers to be able to effectively create a sponge with 0.33 nanometers pores to capture water from air and also to capture carbon dioxide. The second story has also to do with AI accelerated by NVIDIA and with models like Grok, which is nanopalm, which is effectively creating a nanorobot 500 nanometers by 1,000 nanometers to be able to do gene editing, leveraging the CRISPR technology to take out sickle cell disease. Now, in both these instances, they originated 20 years ago in research, but AI was able to really accelerate the outcomes and the outputs such that we can move into new value pools. So I think with every technological trend, humanity is going to always manage to shift to new value pools when it comes to workforce and productivity. But we have some great announcements to talk about here today. Let's begin with you, Elon, the things that we're doing with XAI.
We're excited to announce that we're doing a 500 megawatt.
500 megawatt.
500 megawatt, yeah.
We're doing 500 megawatt.
Sorry, this. No, 500 gigawatt one will have to wait. That'll be $8 bazillion trillion.
It's not bad.
So yeah, we're doing a XAI and the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia are doing a
Humane, 500 megawatts, starting with 50 megawatts phase one, and we're doing it with NVIDIA.
Yes.
Congratulations to the Humane team, to Tarek and team. Such a fantastic job. Jensen, I think we're also doing some great announcements this week.
We are. Well, we're announcing all kinds of things. Our partnership with Humane is going incredibly well. First of all, we worked together to get this company started and off the ground, and just got an incredible customer with Elon. Could you imagine a startup company, approximately $0 billion in revenues, now going to build a data center for Elon? 500 megawatts is gigantic. This company is off the charts right away. In addition to that, AWS, as you know, is also
Congratulations to the Humane team with AWS, starting with 100 megawatts with a gigawatt ambition and counting.
So AWS is also coming to Humane. We're working with Humane on Omniverse digital twins. As you know, that AI is not just agentic AI and chatbots, and cognitive AI is incredibly important to the world. But AI applies to everything: chemicals and proteins and genes and physics and fluid dynamics and particles, and of course robotics and activation. And we created this world called Omniverse, where robots can learn how to be good robots. And it's physically based, it obeys the laws of physics. And so robots can learn in these environments. And we're working with Humane to apply Omniverse to all kinds of digital factories and robotics and warehouses and things like that. We're also working in Saudi Arabia to build supercomputers to simulate quantum computers, and using our computers to be the controller and the error correction. Quantum error correction requires an enormous amount of computation. So we're doing a lot of great work there too. A big partnership with Humane. They're off the charts, off the ground and off the charts at the same time.
This is how we walk the talk in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia in partnership with the U.S. Yesterday, the President and His Royal Highness announced the AI strategic framework and partnership. Today, we're going big with Elon and Jensen. So thank you for those opportunities. Now, they told me I have time for two last questions. So the first one was for you, Elon, and there's a big one for you, Jensen, so prepare for that one. AI in space, is that possible?
Yes. If civilization continues, which it probably will, then AI in space is inevitable. I always have to preface that, We shouldn't take civilization for granted. We need to make sure to take care to ensure that civilization has an upward arc. I mean, any student of history knows that civilization does not always have an upward arc, and in fact, civilizations have life cycles. So hopefully we are in a strong upward arc. I think we are for now, but we don't want to take that for granted or be complacent. But the way to think of AI in space is that in order to achieve any meaningful percentage of a Kardashev 2 scale civilization, where you're using even a millionth of the sun's energy, you must have solar-powered AI satellites in deep space. So that once you realize, once you think in terms of a Kardashev 2 scale civilization, which is what percentage of the sun's energy are you turning into useful work, then it becomes obvious that space is overwhelmingly what matters. Overwhelmingly. The sun only receives roughly 1/2 billionth of, the Earth only receives roughly 1/2 billionth of the sun's energy. So if you want to have something that is, say, 1 million times more energy than Earth could possibly produce, you must go into space. This is where it's kind of handy to have a space company, I guess.
Chips in space too.
Yes.
Easier to cool chips in space.
There's definitely no water in space.
Yeah.
That doesn't involve water.
Just hang out.
Well, you just got to radiate.
That's right.
So my estimate is that actually the cost of electricity, the cost effectiveness of AI in space will be overwhelmingly better than AI on the ground. So long before you exhaust potential energy sources on Earth, long before, meaning I think even perhaps in the 4 or 5 year time frame, the lowest cost way to do AI compute will be with solar powered AI satellites. So I'd say not more than 5 years from now.
Wow.
And just look at the supercomputers we're building together. Let's say each one of the racks is 2 tons. Out of that 2 tons, 1.95 of it is probably for cooling.
Right.
Just imagine how tiny that little supercomputer is, right? Each one of these GB300 racks will just be a little tiny thing.
And just electricity generation is already becoming a challenge. So if you start doing any kind of scaling for both electricity generation and cooling, you realize, okay, space is incredibly compelling. So like, let's say you wanted to do, I don't know, 200 or 300 gigawatts per year of AI compute.
Yeah.
It's very difficult to do that on Earth. The US average electricity usage, the last time I checked, was around 460 gigawatts per year average usage. So something like, say, at 300 gigawatts a year, that would be like 2/3 of US electricity production per year. There's no way you're building power plants at that level. And then if you take it up to, say, a terawatt per year, impossible.
Yeah.
Like, you have to do that in space. There just is no way to do a terawatt per year on Earth. And in space, you've got continuous solar. You actually don't need batteries because it's always sunny in space.
That's right, exactly.
And the solar panels actually become cheaper because you don't need glass or framing, and the cooling is just radiative. So that's why I think
that's the dream.
Yes,
that's the dream.
So Jensen, everybody last night was asking me, and I'm mindful it's earnings call for you today. Everybody has been asking me to ask you, are we going to have an AI bubble?
That's the last question. All right, all right, let me just tell you what we see. Okay, so I think it's really important when you look at what's happening around the world and go back to first principles of what's happening in computer science and computing. There are 3 things that are happening. The first thing is that we all know that Moore's law has run its course, and the amount of demand for computing versus the amount of computation we can get out of general purpose computing is really challenging. And so the world's been moving to accelerated computing for some time. We've been pushing this now for over 20 years. Let me give you one statistic. I was just at supercomputing. 6 years ago, CPUs were 90% of the world's supercomputers, top 500 supercomputers. 6 years ago. This year, less than 15%. Went from 90% to 10%, and meanwhile, accelerated computing went from the other way, 10% to now 90%. Okay, so you're seeing that inflection point, the transition in high-performance computing from general-purpose computing to accelerated computing. Well, one of the most intensive computation things that the world does in cloud is data processing. Several $100 billion of computation is done on just raw data processing, just SQL processing, data frames, everybody's names, address, their sex, their age, where they live, how much money they make. All of that sits into a data frame. And that data frame drives the world today, whether it's in banking or, whether it's in credit cards or, of course, e-commerce and everything from ad recommendation. Everything is driven off of that data frame. That data frame costs hundreds of dollars to go compute. And so that's the number one thing. End of Moore's law. How do you know what ad to recommend to somebody, what book to recommend, what movie to recommend? The internet is so gigantic without a recommender system that a little tiny phone of us will have no chance of ever seeing the right information. That Rexus is the engine of the internet today. That's going generative AI. It used to be running on CPUs. Now it runs on GPUs, which then says the third thing, if you just look at those 2 applications, many of the internet companies can build an enormous number of GPU supercomputers just doing that. Of course, then it creates the third opportunity on top of it, which is agentic AI. This is Grok, and this is OpenAI, this is Anthropic, this is Gemini. Agentic AI sits on top of that. But don't forget to think about what is happening underneath what everybody sees as AI today. There's a whole movement of computing from general purpose computing to accelerated computing. And that, if you take that into consideration, you'll come to the conclusion that, in fact, what is left over to fuel that revolutionary agentic AI is not only substantially less than you thought, and all of it justified.
Today's video
Now, this fundamentally challenges, Tom, where sports nutrition guidelines are coming from, because they are based off the belief that substrate carbohydrate oxidation as a important fuel substrate is incredibly important to perform well during exercise.
Dr. Andrew Kudnick, your lab just published some really interesting stuff surrounding carbohydrates versus no carbohydrates in some intense exercise, like not just like long distance stuff. Let's just jump right into it, man. What did you guys find? What was this study about? And then let's break down some other studies your lab has done.
There's been a lot of thought around it's really important to have carbohydrates right before performance. And we have published a number of studies leading up to this, but we were really interested in, when people think they're going to go run their first race, they're probably going to go run a 5K, or like maybe if they train long enough, they might do a 10K, right? So we're really interested in these different forms of exercise and short, middle, long duration. But we recently published something on 5 to 10K performance. And what we did is we asked subjects to come in, and what we like to do as much as we can is try to control as many variables as possible we know impact performance. And that's not a common thing because it's very difficult to do, but we did that. And then we asked subjects, hey, we want you to eat a very, very low carbohydrate based meal right before exercise. But then we also want you to eat a high carbohydrate based meal, which is what is currently sports nutrition recommendations right before exercise. And we had published a number of studies leading into this that made us think, historically, sports nutrition guidelines would say that you need those carbohydrates to have peak level performance. But we're seeing all this evidence from our groups and others that when you controlled all the confounding variables, that we weren't seeing that carbohydrates were having quite nearly the same level of impact, especially not at the volumes in which were being recommended, like 60 grams per hour during exercise or 120 grams per hour during exercise. We just weren't seeing that. And so we actually wanted to test it. So we ran a randomized control crossover trial where we asked subjects to eat a high carbohydrate-based meal and a low carbohydrate-based meal, and then run as fast as they possibly could a 5K time trial. Then we also asked another cohort of 15 subjects to do a 10K time trial. And this was, again, on both diets. And what we found was that when looking at these two different nutrition paradigms, one that's currently gold standard recommendation for optimal performance during exercise, the high carb approach, versus this very low carbohydrate approach, which a lot of sports nutrition world would speculate would impair performance, we saw no difference in performance. Okay, this middle distance performance. And one fascinating component to this is one, it didn't impact performance. This again goes against key sports nutrition dogmatic thinking, but we were able to control key variables that a lot of studies previously had not. But when actually looking at the key biomarkers of what drove performance, a lot of people point to, okay, you need to be able to burn as many carbohydrates as possible during exercise as you can, because there was all this evidence that had suggested that's a more efficient fuel at higher intensities. Well, we found that these two different pre-exercise meals produce distinct levels of carbohydrate oxidation and distinct levels of fat oxidation. And despite completely distinct levels of what type of fuel they were performing on, they had the same exact performance. Now, this fundamentally challenges, Tom, where sports nutrition guidelines are coming from, because they are based off the belief that substrate carbohydrate oxidation as a important fuel substrate is incredibly important to perform well during exercise. And despite having one nutritional approach before exercise that lowered carbohydrate oxidation and one that increased it, we didn't see a difference in performance. So it really gets to this question of, are carbohydrates actually essential to maintain your peak performance? And we've done a number of studies that really begin to unravel and challenge whether that's actually true.
I recommend having like some salt or some salty electrolytes. I put a link down below for the ones that I use. Helps a ton when you're fasting or when you're calorically deprived, where you're trying to just reduce calories in general. So that is called Element, and that link gets you a free sample variety pack with any purchase. Okay, so with any purchase, you get a free pack of electrolytes that you can keep for yourself, you can give to your friends. It's a pack of their leading flavors. So this is cool because you're getting kind of a freebie with it. But I'm telling you, with 1,000 milligrams of sodium, it does curb your appetite. I can say firsthand, I've been using it for 7 years, like when I fast or when I'm reducing calories, game changer. So try adding something like that in if you're trying to reduce calories instead of maybe a diet soda. It's a good alternative. So when you look at, well, first off, what did the low carb diet look like? Like how low carb was it?
Very low. I mean, the whole goal of it, in this trial, it was actually asking them to consume a very low carbohydrate based meal, because we just wanted to see
immediate effect.
Immediate effect, the acute response. Like, hey, you need to eat this before exercise. I'm sure many people who run a marathon or are about to perform in some exercise bout, they're like, okay, carb load. Okay, you need to fill out your glycogen levels. You need to carb load. You need to do all these things. And that all came from the belief that you need to have higher levels of glucose being burned during exercise to have better performance. You need higher levels of glycogen levels during exercise to have optimal performance. And so that's where that came from. But what we were seeing is that those things did not predict performance when we controlled key variables in our study. So this is really an acute response study looking at the direct impact of a meal right before exercise, from a high carbohydrate approach to a low, very low carbohydrate based approach right before you go in to perform something like a 5K or 10K middle distance run.
Do you suspect that fasted state would have performed similarly?
It's interesting you ask that, because everything says that pre-exercise nutrition is incredibly important, but there are some studies from Philip Prince Group, who's a key collaborator of ours at Grove City College, that show that at least for 5K performance, that fasting leading into an exercise doesn't inherently impair exercise performance. I think things get a little more nuanced though when you get beyond the middle distance time frame and get into these longer duration exercise bouts, where there is more evidence that suggests that pre-exercise nutrition may have a more important impact. But yes, there are studies looking at 5K time trials where fasting doesn't impair performance compared to not fasting. Not saying that all evidence supports that, but there is certainly evidence that has emerged in the last 2 years that has suggested that.
And would you consider like a 5K still pretty, I mean, man, it's like the people that are running 5Ks fast, I mean, they gotta be still, not full beta oxidation. I mean, they're probably those guys are sitting in like a good zone 3, hitting zone 4 sometimes. I mean, those guys are fast, right?
And it really depends on their level of athletic performance. So we know that a person just coming off the street, just getting out and exercising, if they ran that as fast as they possibly can, I guess the better way to frame this, Tom, is to say, we know that athletes who are elite level performers can maintain extremely high levels of their maximal oxygen capacity, or a VO2 max. They can maintain a very high percentage of that, upwards of 90+% for long durations of time. Whereas for someone else who isn't trained at that huge volumes at very high intensities, if they went up to 90 to 95%, they would very quickly start to see deteriorations in performance pretty rapidly. Whereas what we're really seeing with elite level athletes is their ability to maintain that high intensity for very prolonged periods of time. So
when you control for that variable, the brain, substrates don't seem to matter as much. But well, could you almost speculate that when you're not dealing with an athlete mind, that they're going to be more sensitive to the changes because they don't have maybe that athlete override? Let's just call it that.
I would say, I would actually say, Tom, that it depends. So when you think about athletes who are attempting to reach peak level performance, what we have repeatedly showed is that, because we've done studies back in 2023 where we asked individuals who were high-end athletes, but not elite. Okay, not elite. They were, running over 50 kilometers per week, lean body weight, high VO2 maxes, middle age. And what we found that when we asked these individuals to undergo a ketogenic diet for 4 weeks, then run a 1 mile time trial, so much shorter than a 5K or a 10K, so very short duration, very intense. Okay, like this is not an easy thing to do. Someone's like, oh, 1 mile, Tom, that's no big deal. 1 mile at a slow pace is no big deal.
1 mile sucks.
1 mile at your fastest pace possible is absolutely one of the most brutal forms of
torture.
That's a great term, actually. That's a really great term. It's actually something that a lot of elite level track athletes would describe as one of the hardest distances to maintain because it's so grueling, so brutal, but it's for the fastest in the world around 4 minutes, for some of these athletes. That's incredibly elite. That said, I think that when we talk about, but that's a 1 mile time trial. And what we found is that we didn't see any differences or deterioration in performance when they were having low carbohydrate based diets, as long as they adapted to it for 4 weeks in duration, for not only a 1 mile time trial, but also 6 by 800 meter sprints. And this is when we would traditionally believe that carbohydrates were essential, with quotes around it, for maintaining high levels of exercise intensity. In fact, they were performing at over 85% of their VO2 max, when we would suspect, based on all historical sports nutrition literature, that you would be burning near zero levels. Around 10% would be from carbohydrates at that stage, but instead, near zero levels of fat. Whereas you would be almost completely reliant in these more short-term, highly intense forms of exercise on carbohydrates. And what we found is that when these athletes reduced their carbohydrates over a 4-week window of time and actually adapted to that diet, we found that there was no difference in performance, but that the way in which they were able to sustain performance on a ketogenic diet was they were burning over 1.5 grams of fat per minute. In fact, some athletes were burning north of 1.85 grams per minute, which is the highest ever reported levels of fat oxidation in the literature ever. And it was at over 85% of their VO2 max, when we would historically believe
that's not possible.
Not possible. Yeah. In fact, we thought that fat oxidation levels would be virtually zero, based on all historical models and paradigm in sports nutrition. I mean, this completely shattered that understanding, not only for us, but in general. But then there's this other extreme end of the spectrum, Tom, where we thought, okay, well, what about if you go to the opposite end of the spectrum? Go for a prolonged, strenuous, basically hitting the wall trial, where you go as long as you possibly can to sustain performance. And in this case, we recruited Ironman competitors who had completed an Ironman, so some very, very high-end athletes. And we asked them to do the same thing, to dramatically reduce the amount of carbohydrates in their diet to less than 50 grams per day.
How much convincing did that take, by the way? I'm just curious.
So it's funny you ask that, because it's not just, we had them on each diet for 6 weeks. And then we had a 2-week washout period between each successive diet, because what we wanted was the diet to be long enough to control for changes from the previous diet. If they started, like, say, low carb first, we wanted the diet to be sufficiently long and the crossover period to be sufficiently long as well, to wash out as many of those effects as we possibly can, because some of those linger after the diet is over. But they didn't just do 6 weeks on each diet. They did 6 weeks, 2-week crossover, 6 weeks. I mean, they were committed to this for 14 weeks. And on top of that, we asked them to control their activity, which they did, their calories, and
you don't have to worry about Ironman athletes like not wanting to like track things. I think they're very like meticulous people, but I know that they're also inherently like some of the most dietary stubborn people I've ever met, right?
Yeah.
Like getting them to go low carb. You've got your pockets of low carb endurance people that are, and then you've got the ones that'll just like die on the sword and will like die before you tell them, before they'll actually go low carb. That's why I asked, like, you have to convince these people.
Yeah, and you'd be amazed how entrenched this is. Actually, you wouldn't be amazed, but it's very entrenched. However, what we've found as well is that, we're running a survey right now looking at a large cohort of athletes using one of these performance-based apps where you track. And, this is preliminary. It can't speak too much to it now. I can just say that I don't think that is as entrenched as people think. I think the evidence that our group and others have produced that have showed that, hey, whether you're running a 1 mile time trial, 600 by 800 meter sprints, very short duration, very high intense forms of exercise, whether you're running a 5K or 10K, whether you're over here doing a hitting the wall trial to exhaustion, and you're asked to go for 2 to 4 hours nonstop at a very high strenuous form of exercise. Any one of these, what we've consistently showed that is that lower carbohydrate intake as a part of a habitual diet does not reliably impair performance. So I think athletes are becoming aware of this, and I think more athletes are attempting to try it and see how they do. But there's a lot of nuance here when someone embarks on, let's say, a lower carbohydrate diet paradigm. If you're an athlete, because we know there are predictable and preventable pitfalls of these diets that athletes have to be even more mindful of, because they're focused on performance outcomes, whereas someone who's not focused on performance maybe not notice some of these unique distinctions of, let's say, consuming the right minerals, the right supplements on the diet, to calories, to when you place protein or the amount of protein, or even so far as to say, do you place some strategic carbohydrates in the diet? Would that improve performance? And I think those are important things for athletes to understand when they embark on this diet, because those are critical nuance to maintaining and maximize performance on these distinct diets. And I want to add something here, Tom, because some athletes may say, well, if they're able to maintain, top level performance in the ketogenic diet, but they could have done that on high carb, like why make the shift? And I want to make something very clear. In our first study in 2023, we saw that 30% of the athletes who are on a high carb diet developed glucose levels consistent with prediabetes, meaning that some of these athletes were developing glucose levels that would indicate some form of underlying metabolic derangement or dysfunction. And that's something we're seeing much more ubiquitously in American society. Up to 93% of individuals have some form of metabolic derangement. Over 86% or 68% of individuals are obese, which accumulates often unmeasured levels of elevated insulin, inflammation, oxidative stress, changes in the entire metabolism. So we're seeing these things at much higher levels, and it's become a much more pertinent topic, even in those we thought were immune to metabolic dysfunction. Athletes, not only athletes, but athletes who are lean and exercising regularly. So they're not immune. In fact, there's a paradigm called the fit but unhealthy athlete. And this was written by Phil Larson and Phil Maffetone in Sports Medicine, describing the key measures that often lead athletes to, yes, perform well, but actually be unhealthy. Mm-hmm. And, when you think, oh, you're an elite level athlete, they must be some of the healthiest people on earth. Not always, Tom. Not always. Particularly, one of the key variables they described in this, besides, common themes of like, okay, maybe they're overtraining or training high volumes that are unhelpful, or they have high levels of stress they're not recovering from. But one of the most important variables they describe is these very high glycolytic, rapid forms of carbohydrates they're consuming that can lead to these rapid spikes in glucose and rapid spikes in insulin that they're repeatedly giving themselves for. If you're a high level athlete exercising for 4 hours a day, for 4 hours straight, you're giving 60 to 120 grams of very rapid forms of carbohydrates that spike glucose and insulin every day, 4 hours every day.
Yeah, it doesn't matter whether you're moving and utilizing that or not. That is a consistent. You look at like the Tour de France guys, like what is it now? Like, I mean, keeping glucose steady at like a 160 plus for hours and hours and hours.
Yeah, I've seen world record holders' glycemic responses, and I will just say that I think that there's a new awareness that there is, one, because of the growing elevation in chronic disease numbers in the United States, alarming levels. Even kids, we're seeing like up to 20% of kids have obesity and prediabetes. I mean, this is basically, they were immune to these things before, and we're starting to see it. So even athletes were starting to see this as well. And I think it gets to a question of, we know that one of the most important ways that you can regulate your overall metabolic health, and that's what we're talking is the kind of epicenter of this discussion, around not just performance, but also your overall health, is your metabolism and how it functions. And we know the most powerful way to change your metabolism, Tom, is through diet, without question. We know exercise is a very potent way to change metabolism. There's other ways to change metabolism, but the most powerful way to do it is through diet. And so there's a key question for athletes to consider in their journey to not only to maximize performance, but also maximize health, is what diet should I be consuming to not just get one, but ideally to get both, because no athlete should be sacrificed at the altar of performance. Their health should not be sacrificed as a consequence of trying to have elite level performance. In an ideal world, you want to have both. And this is a conversation around diet that I think is super critical, because even some of the most impressive athletes out there, some of which who've been, I give them tremendous accolades, have come public and disclosed that they had developed prediabetes. In fact, one who was very public about it, and I give him a lot of credit, is Lionel Sanders. He was a 2017 or 2018 world champion Ironman completer, and openly disclosed last year that he developed prediabetes. In fact, he said, I felt tired, lethargic, wasn't sleeping well, didn't feel like I was recovering, just my mood was poor. I go to the doctor, get blood work, everything seems fine. And I looked at my average levels of glucose over the last 2 months, and it showed I was in prediabetes. And he said he made some rapid changes in the type of ultra processed forms of carbohydrates, dramatically reduced those things in his diet, immediately resolved his prediabetes, which is something we also observed in our study, that when athletes move from these higher carbohydrate diets to low carbohydrate, very low carbohydrate ketogenic diets, they rapidly, almost within the first week, resolve these glucose levels away from pre-diabetic levels, the ones who did have elevated levels. And nearly all the athletes saw a reduction in glucose, except for one. So it's a pretty common phenomenon in this respect. But when he then went on to remove these in the diet, he went on to win, and he said he reported feeling better, he resolved his prediabetes, and then he went on to win the half Ironman world championship. So I think this is a conversation that's being elevated, because I was skeptical myself. I live with a chronic irreversible metabolic disease of type 1 diabetes, where glucose and insulin is paramount to our long-term health and overall lifespan, but it also affects how we feel every single day at every single meal. Whereas these athletes don't often see these things until years and years of accumulated effects over time before they see this end signal of elevation in glucose. And that's usually a consequence of not just, a couple bad meals, but usually a consequence of years of choices, sometimes to attempting to improve their health based on what sports nutrition has told them to improve their health. And it might not always be doing that for their overall health.
I mean, calling a spade, they live with the blinders on for performance, right?
It's fair enough, yeah.
I mean, we've said many times that, I think if you told an athlete that they could eat a dog turd and it would make them perform better, they would do it. It's not about, it's especially, I think Ironman athletes are interesting because you start finding that the elite level Ironman athletes are actually a little bit older than elite level athletes in a lot of other sports. I mean, that's changing a little bit, but I think some of it has to do with the time commitment, right? Like, so
yeah, that's true.
For recreational to moderately elite, people that would still have to work a full-time job, that are not professional, the time commitment, right? You're either independently wealthy or you are maybe a little bit older and at a position in your life when you can actually dedicate that time. So you do find that. So I think there might be more awareness of their metabolic health and their long-term health in maybe a cohort like Ironman athletes. But if you were to take that to say something that was like a younger sprinter or a CrossFit athlete, dude, they'll tell you to F off. They would just, right? It's just because it's not even in their scope of awareness at all. And especially when you start getting into like fitness, bodybuilding, like forget it. Like they're gonna absolutely die at 30. doing what they want to do for every ounce of performance or muscle mass. So, fortunately you're dealing with Ironman athletes, which are probably like, they're thinking about these things a little bit more, but they're also like, their finger on the pulse of their metabolic health, maybe a little bit more than some of these other sports. But I think we're going to get to a point where we're going to see a lot of athletes, endurance athletes, all kinds of athletes that are in their 20s and 30s now. I think in 10 years, it is going to be an epidemic of metabolic issues with these athletes. Just mark my words on it, because they are marinating their cells and their tissues in glucose, and they're not being educated on glycation. They're not being educated on all these things that are happening. It doesn't matter if you are burning through it, if you are marinating your cells and tissues in that level of glucose, there's going to be levels of DNA damage. There's going to be levels of arterial damage. It's going to happen. And it's overlooked because performance is fine at the moment.
But it doesn't have to be that way.
Agreed.
And that's what athletes need to understand, is it doesn't have to be that way. And, I'm all for improving performance. I mean, I was that person when I was, 18, 19, 20. I wanted to do anything to be bigger, stronger, faster. And I wasn't even an elite athlete. I just wanted to do it for my own personal goals and achievement. But I think it is incredibly important for athletes who may be listening to this, or someone who, coaches or healthcare professionals who are navigating athletes, to know that it does not have to be that way. What we, one of the things you bring up is like you kind of forecast this potential epidemic that might be coming in athletics around poor health. But I actually attempted to look into that, because when our results came out and we saw 30% showing glucose levels consistent with prediabetes, I didn't believe it. These are 10% body fat, high VO2 maxes running over 50 kilometers per week. That was just the level of bare minimums to enter the study. This wasn't like someone were even in better shape than that. That was just average, right? And some of them develop these poor glucose levels that we know are associated with derangement, prediabetes, and the long-term consequences of that. And so I didn't believe it. And so I actually started to look around for other signals of if we were maybe seeing an outlier response in our data, because it's possible. We looked at 10 athletes. We did one of the more controlled trials there was, randomized. We controlled calories. We controlled their body weight. We controlled their activity. We monitored their compliance with the diet with ketone levels and continuous glucose monitors. I mean, we did a lot of things that most people don't do. We had a registered dietitian monitoring them and keeping on tabs with them frequently, all that stuff. But I didn't necessarily buy it because I'm like, well, maybe it was just our study. And so I started looking around at other studies that had used not just static measures of glucose control that are often used to diagnose someone with diabetes. Okay, what are those for those who are unfamiliar? There's three. Number one is fasting glucose. Number two is an oral glucose tolerance test. And number three is an hemoglobin A1C. Real quick for your audience, fasting glucose is a single blood measurement often taken every 6 to 12 months at one time point in one day of 365 days of the year. The meal you had the night before can influence that fasting glucose value. That's a single snapshot of one moment in health. It's incredibly limited. Number two is an oral glucose tolerance test. This is just throwing back 75 grams of glucose and testing to see if you can bring your glucose levels down into a normal range. Number one, that test is only valid in high carbohydrate environments. It's not valid in ketogenic environments. It also isn't always, not everyone's enthusiastic about doing an oral glucose tolerance test and throwing back 75 grams of what is equivalent to a soda. But it's also not perfect because it's a single day. Okay, what if you exercise the day before? We know exercise can have 24 to 48 hour insulin sensitizing effects for some individuals. So that's highly variable. So again, a single snapshot. Or you have HbA1c, which is an average of your glucose in the blood over a 2 to 3 month period of time. So that seems like a better measure. However, Tom, we know that that's related to how glucose sticks to the red blood cell. And everyone's a little different in how the glucose actually enzymatically binds to that measure or to tissue to measure it. And so these all have major limitations. So what we did instead is we tracked glucose levels every 5 minutes, 24 hours a day over each 4 to 6 week diet period. okay, the entire time. And this is using something called a continuous glucose monitor. We also calibrated that against actual real blood glucose. So it's interstitial glucose is where these CGMs sit. And those track much better with actual real glucose levels in real time. And we use those as the measure. Now, I looked at studies that did the same exact thing in athletes to try to see, hey, in our study, we saw 30%. Is that normal? What we found is that when this was in middle-aged athletes, that's also important because this is the window between young, healthy, and sometimes what appears to be immune to some of these metabolic dysfunction issues. And then over 65 years of age and older individuals where your risk of at least one form of metabolic dysfunction is nearly guaranteed. And so this is middle window of this transition between these two states. That's why we wanted to look at it. We thought that was important. But what if you're younger? Well, I pulled some data in younger athletes to various spectrums and even elite athletes from other researchers and other groups. And when looking at all these studies, and we actually published this in 2023 in a research article, The Low Carbohydrate Ketogenic Diet on Glycemic Homeostasis and Frontiers. And what you will see in that article is I actually showed the individual response of athletes that are published using these monitors at least 7 days. Because keep in mind, the other measurements we talked about, fasting glucose, oral glucose tolerance test, and HbA1c, hemoglobin A1c, are incredibly limited. CGMs provide a much more dynamic and dense look at glycemic control over time. And I looked at only the studies that showed those in athletes. And what you find is that there is an incidence of levels consistent with prediabetes, even in the fasted state. Okay, not just 24 hours, but in the fasted state, in anywhere from 10 to 30%. In fact, some studies showed as high as 60% in some athletes. And so we weren't alone in seeing this. This has actually been reported in a number of other studies. It did appear that age was influenced it a bit, so those who were younger were more immune to having these issues. But it wasn't the body mass of these athletes, BMI. It wasn't their aerobic power or capacity or their VO2 max. It was actually the biggest predictor on what their glucose control was in the fasted state was what they were eating during the day. Specifically, the amount of carbohydrates they're consuming. That predicted the actual level of glucose in the fasted state. So often people think, oh, well, because the fasted state, Tom, represents your underlying metabolic state. Exactly. It's independent of what you do in any particular moment with exercise or you ate a meal at your favorite restaurant. Obviously, those cause rapid changes throughout the day in glucose and insulin. But when you look at the fasted state, it clears up all that noise. And in the clearest state, when you remove all the smoke, all these other variables, we saw the elevated glucose levels consistent with prediabetes was most commonly associated and predicted, not even by age, to the same degree that the carbohydrate volume you were consuming today predicted your actual basal metabolic state after all that was removed. So there's something clearly happening in athletes that is unique and related to their diet. And what was very interesting and unsurprising is when we published this work, I had a lot of physicians and athletes themselves who never talked about this reaching out and saying, hey, that's me. So I'm not saying this is ubiquitous, but what I'm saying is there's a percentage of athletes who are experiencing this that is often going undetected. And diet appears to be the number one predictive factor for why that's happening.
Do you feel, when you say that about the fasted state, like removing all the noise and it's kind of like it's just like a clear snapshot of like your true metabolic state, is that why I would almost guess why someone that is in poor metabolic health has a much harder time in a fasted state? Like they feel hungry, they feel like they're usually the ones that are saying, I can't do it fasted, I need food. Some of it's psychological, but I mean, really, you talk about people that are metabolically flexible, like there's no qualms whatsoever. They're just like, sure, I can train fasted. Like they don't really have an issue with it. And then you talk to other people that are, insulin resistant, things like that. Like they're the ones that usually, and this isn't even a knock on them. And sometimes I'm thinking of like the regular person here for a second that you ask them to go train fasted and they're going to have, whoa, Are you kidding me? Like,
so there's something really fascinating that we see when we actually measure this phenomenon is there's a lot of pieces of data that actually support exactly what you're saying. There's an abundance of literature that shows that when athletes consume high amounts of carbohydrates before exercise, they're actually not per se improving their overall energetic availability or output. They're just shifting where the nutrients are coming from. So when you eat a bunch of carbohydrates right before exercise, you see a spike in insulin. Insulin binds the fat cell at very, very low levels at high potency, meaning you don't need much insulin to have a profound impact on how fat cells work. And it shuts down fat breakdown for fat oxidation. So when athletes are consuming higher carbohydrate-based diets, they are paradoxically inhibiting the degrees of fat oxidation they can tap into, becoming what some may call less metabolically flexible. We also see that when they do that, they paradoxically break down muscle glycogen. Why? Because if you're trying to maintain prolonged strenuous exercise output and you're blocking fat oxidation, where do you get the other substrates from for carbohydrates? You have to pull it from the stored forms in the muscle. So oftentimes people are consuming high amounts of carbohydrates before exercise or during exercise, and they think that they're preventing the breakdown of muscle glycogen. And they are paradoxically forcing it to be broken down because they're blocking a component of fat oxidation during exercise. And so
I just want to make sure I'm clear on it, because that's fascinating. So if you have circulating insulin and it's inhibiting lipolysis, then you are paradoxically forcing the body to essentially like have no choice but to almost break down even muscle tissue at that rate too, I would imagine. Like it could almost be, I mean, it seems like it's funny because like carbohydrates are anti-catabolic, but probably only in that moment. So I just want to make sure, if you have circulating insulin, do you have this, is it also anti-catabolic at the same time? So is it forcing you to pull from glycogen, or is it like if you were to go for long periods of time and you've paradoxically shifted that state, could you actually make the argument that you're going to waste muscle faster than if you were metabolically flexible and able to be in a fasted state?
What we see over time with long-term adaptation on particular diets, we see that when individuals are, well, number one, insulin is a very anabolic hormone. So when it elevates, yes, you are causing growth or anabolism. You are blocking the breakdown of tissue, including fat and including muscle. But we know there are a number of other key counter-regulatory mechanisms at play when you consume diets like a ketogenic diet that are much lower in the amount of insulin that are being released, upwards of 33 to 75% reductions in insulin on these diets, because you see upregulations in things like ketone bodies. Fat now becomes an overwhelming predominant form of energy. Upwards of like 80% of energy is now coming from fat. And so ketones can directly block protein catabolism and breakdown. And so it's very much dependent on the context of the diet. But to so people would think lower insulin, oh, it's going to be more catabolic. We see that that's not inherently the case because there's all these other mechanisms at play depending on the setting. But to your point, I would contend that when we think about muscle health and we think about overall muscle function, usually we're not actually per se thinking about insulin unless you're a bodybuilder. You know, if you're a bodybuilder, like, oh, I want to have more insulin to cause anabolism and more growth. But the irony of that is that, as we were talking about before, that the insulin is much more potent at the fat cell at much lower levels than it is the muscle cell. That is why when you consume higher levels of carbohydrates right before exercise or during it, that you are first preventing the fat cell from being broken down. And then that lack of availability of fat oxidation potential has to be supplemented elsewhere and is forcing the glycogen breakdown in the muscle. You would only suspect that once you are not able to sufficiently maintain glucose levels, that you would have to pull from something else. And where would you pull it from? Well, historical literature back to the 1960s says that the only place to pull that from is one, the glycerol backbone of fat, but that only counts for 10% in the context of an extreme restriction like a fast.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Amino acids would have to come from your muscle, and that can only account for another 30 to 40%. And so ultimately your body is forced to pull from other things like fat, and then the conversion of things like ketone bodies, even just to maintain things like brain energy metabolism during these kind of extreme environments like fast, or let's say very, very, or other things like that where insulin are essentially what we're referring to here, like in the context around extreme low levels of nutrients, or pushing it to the opposite end by increasing energy expenditure to high degrees.
Now, how long does it take an elite athlete usually to rip through their liver and muscle glycogen stores? Like if they're doing a long event?
Great question. You can actually see, depending on the intensity of exercise. So let's say low intensity exercise, we see studies that athletes can go to 4 to 5 hours before they experience the signal of low, let's say liver glycogen, which would be around 4 to 5 hours. Whereas if you crank the intensity from 40 to 50% of your VO2 max up to 70 to 80% of your VO2 max, you precipitously drop that down to the 1 to 2 hour mark.
Okay.
And so then you get hypoglycemic. That's kind of the signal that you no longer have sufficient glycogen, particularly from the liver, to be able to actually maintain it. But prolonged forms of strenuous exercise, the more strenuous, the quicker you actually break down not only liver glycogen, but also muscle glycogen.
Okay. So if you take a conventional like endurance athlete that's maybe having high carbs before, okay, so they're going to burn through, they're going to rip through whatever the meal that ate, which is probably not as much as they think, right? Because, okay, then let's just say they've got 2 hours of ripping through their glycogen stores.
Okay.
And then they start pumping goo packs, or a patch, right? So they're consistently spiking their insulin, inhibiting lipolysis.
Yep.
But there's no glycogen left. I would imagine that when in the gaps between which they squeeze the goo pack in their mouth, they have insulin elevated, but there's no more glycogen to tap into, but insulin is inhibiting lipolysis, wouldn't they start to break down muscle tissue?
We don't know.
So you get what I'm going at.
I do see where you're getting at.
Because I've noticed a pattern, and I might get flamed for saying this, but the low carb endurance athletes have more muscle than the high carb endurance athletes. And I've seen that. I can't say 100%, but I look and I see it. And part of me also wonders if maybe the low carb athletes, the low carb endurance athletes are just more conditioned to buffer that, right? Maybe their bodies are more efficient at being in that fasted state. So maybe they're less likely to break down muscle tissue, whereas the high carb athlete potentially has enabled themselves with constant fueling that when they do go without it, they start ripping into their stores.
It's a very good hypothesis that I don't know the answer to. I don't know. I mean, we know that extremely long duration forms of exercise are inherently catabolic. you look no further than blood work of someone who just completed an Ultraman or an Ironman. It's extremely catabolic, and it almost looked like a nuke went off in their biomarkers.
Yeah.
That said, I don't know. Here's the thing, though. Here's this kind of other end of the spectrum, kind of unique paradox here when it comes to carbohydrates or what we're talking about here around nutrition and performance, is that we do see, regardless of the diet, even if you're habituated to a ketogenic diet for 6 weeks or a high carb diet for 6 weeks, we see that if you were to exercise for sufficiently long, you will still see a drop in blood glucose levels if you consume no nutrients during exercise. And we've known this since actually the 1920s, 1925 and 1926, published in the Journal of American Medical Association, published by two physicians at Harvard, Gordon and Levin. And what they found is that when they looked at Boston Marathon runners, that Boston Marathon runners would arrive to the end of the marathon with slurred speech. They'd be pale in the face. Some wouldn't even complete it, not because they weren't fit, but because they were presenting these symptoms of altered brain function. They then tested the blood of these athletes and found that the one thing that stood out is that they were getting levels of glucose consistent with hypoglycemia, a phenomenon more common in diabetes type 1, where you over-administer insulin. And so their brain was becoming deprived of energy and essentially shutting down their body. Then next year, they provided carbohydrates in those same athletes, and almost all of them ubiquitously improve performance. This was actually the first trial that I'm aware of that showed that carbohydrates directly improve performance, these two studies. But that was on a high carbohydrate paradigm. What happens if someone were to adapt to a ketogenic diet and then rely on fat, which is overwhelmingly abundant on the body, and ketone bodies, which can be produced at high levels on these diets? We still see that the body still oxidizes a degree of circulating glucose levels. Now, it's much less when you're on a ketogenic diet, but you also have much less being put into the system on a ketogenic diet, right? So you're just utilizing much more fat, whereas over here you're using much more carbohydrates. But you still find that if you exercise for long enough, typically at least over 2 hours in duration, and these prolonged strenuous exercise bouts, and some athletes it's over an hour, that you find that these individuals will see drops in glucose levels. And we reviewed over 100 years of evidence, over 160 exercise performance and metabolism trials, over 600 citations, looking at what actually predicts performance across all these different domains, regardless of duration, regardless of all these different nuances that confound the study. Like, what is the most ubiquitous thing that predicts performance? It isn't per se the amount of muscle glycogen they have. It isn't per se the maximal ability to break down and utilize carbohydrates. That's what a lot of people think would be the cause. What we found is that one of the most consistent phenomena when someone consumes carbohydrates during exercise is that they completely eliminate the incidence of hypoglycemia during exercise. Now, what is important to realize is just the drop in glucose levels in the control groups of these studies is what predicted why carbohydrates in the treatment group was improving performance. It wasn't that carb oxidation or glycogen predicted it. It was actually that the placebo group was seeing a drop in glucose levels when we reliably see in longer duration strenuous exercise that carbohydrates lead to performance enhancement. Why does that matter? Because when athletes do a ketogenic diet, they can still benefit from just a trickling in of some carbohydrates during exercise. Some athletes describe that going ketogenic diet, they're bonk proof, okay, because they have unlimited amounts of fat. But you still use a degree of glucose.
Yeah, you still have to worry about hypoglycemia to a certain degree.
You do, because we've seen it. We've seen that athletes on a ketogenic diet, most recent one in Ironman completers on 6-week ketogenic diet versus high carb, that the incidence of hypoglycemia happened in the majority of athletes going for at least 2 hours or more of exercise on both diets. There was actually a slightly lower glucose level in the low carbohydrate group. But if you actually calculated the total amount of brain energy metabolites in the blood, glucose, ketones, and lactate, all brain fuels, and you do that on the low carbohydrate ketogenic diet, glucose, ketones, and lactate, you calculate them together, they were equivalent, even though there was a higher or lower level of glucose in the very low carbohydrate group, and they both had the same performance. So it seems, again, the theme is that if you can maintain brain energy substrate use during exercise, particularly long duration strenuous exercise, that appears to be one of the strongest predictors of performance. It's not the only one, but it might be the most important one in that particular setting. So that's why I think it's important for athletes to realize that regardless of the diet you're on, there is a place for some degree of carbohydrates in that setting.
Yeah, like 15 grams, 20 grams an hour.
Even less than that, Tom. Like we've actually found that just 10 grams per hour, so 1 tablespoon of glucose per hour was sufficient to completely abolish the hypoglycemic response. Didn't have major changes in glycogen levels, didn't have major changes in carbohydrate oxidation levels. It specifically mitigated hypoglycemia and improved performance on both diets.
Just to keep your brain functioning, ultimately.
Yes, by 22%. Jeez. A huge improvement. And keep in mind, these levels of carbohydrates we administered are 6 to 12 times lower than what current sports nutrition guidelines are recommending for athletes per hour. So the question is, do we actually need higher levels of carbohydrates during exercise to improve performance, if there even might be a degree of health consequence to doing that all the time? And I think we know right now that the evidence is not supportive of a clear dose response. That's, let's say, at 30 grams versus 60 grams versus 90 grams versus 120 grams. People are pushing the limits to 200 grams nowadays.
So where did this come from? Because I get so frustrated because it's just like, are we going to hold these people accountable when like people start getting diabetes like in their 40s and 50s? Are we going to hold that aren't because that's just what's frustrating is like, are we going to continue to like kill these athletes by giving them this amount of suggesting that this is the right amount of carbohydrate? It frustrates me because it is one of those things like I think you and I have preached this for quite a while and talked about this. And it's one of those things where it's like, okay, this isn't about performance anymore. This is like, if this is needed, this is above and beyond. This is literally like hurting these people.
It has clear potential consequences for these athletes, in some cases, very overt, obvious consequences. I am not here to say you should do this specific diet or this specific nutritional paradigm. Everyone's different. They have to try it for themselves and see how they respond to it and do it the right way. But I'm also here to tell you, you don't have to sacrifice your health to do this. And the amount of pushing of these, like some of the guidelines right now, let's say if you're, doing these, if you're training for like, let's say a very long form of endurance exercise and you're training like upwards of like maybe even 4 hours per day, that if you're an average body weight male, you should be consuming up to almost 1,000 carbohydrates per day. That is, and it's crazy. It's crazy.
That is dangerous. Flat out, that is dangerous.
I think it is clearly has consequences associated to it, right? And the thing is, we were burning it. It's like, okay, but some of these athletes are developing glucose levels consistent with prediabetes.
But playing devil's advocate on the other side is like, people will say that, even with saturated fat, if someone's burning it, like high levels of circulating saturated fat are still going to be problematic.
Yep.
Right? It doesn't matter if you're burning it or not. Like high levels of saturated fat are still going to cause insulin resistance. High levels of saturated fat are still going to cause lipotoxicity and all these other things. How come that argument is okay, but the other one's not? And I'm sorry, I get a little bit heated on that, but it's like, we can't, we got to call a spade on both sides here. It's like that doesn't, selling someone to eat 1,000 grams of carbohydrates because it's going to increase their performance, but because they're protected under the veil of sport, doesn't absolve them of the fact that it's killing people. And that's the way that I look at it.
I think it's leading to levels of damage that are often only being detected after multiple years of accumulated suboptimal metabolic health that then progresses over time. And I think that that's incredibly concerning, and why I talk about this is like, look, you don't have to
say it a lot nicer than me, by the way.
Well, Tom, go for it, man. Because what I'm trying to say here is like, you have a choice, right? Like what we reliably show is that the type of diet you're consuming, as long as it's well formulated, it can be high carb or ketogenic diet, you perform equivalently. But the question is beyond performance into health. What are you doing to make sure that you are living a healthy lifestyle? Because again, you don't have to sacrifice your health at the altar of performance. Yeah. You don't have to do that. And I think it's important for people to realize that. And I think what we're starting to realize is that maybe these high volumes of carbohydrates that are being recommended, and you ask why, because there's all these modeling analysis that says that if you're performing at X percentage of your VO2 max for this duration of time, you must need carbohydrates. But yet our studies showed that you can do so with high levels of fat oxidation. Mm-hmm. We once thought in this sports nutrition community that you can't sustain high levels of prolonged strenuous exercise with fat.
Well, it's been literally said that it's impossible.
But let me give you a perfect case. There was the second best Ironman athlete in the world went into a laboratory setting and was assessed. And they actually in the lab setting completed a world record Ironman time. And if you look at their data, you actually see that about halfway through their time, they flipped to predominant fat oxidation. Okay, so over around half of their entire Ironman time was based predominantly in fat oxidation. So if it is true that you can't do strenuous prolonged exercise bout, how did a literal world record time with one of the best athletes in the world for over half of their endurance exercise bout that led to a world championship time was predominant in fat? That doesn't make sense. How was our study where we saw that over 85% of their VO2 max, when fat oxidation should be near zero if you're on a ketogenic diet and you adapt to it for long enough, that you can actually sustain record levels of fat oxidation? The evidence is no longer consistent that fat oxidation is not able to support these forms of exercise. I think what we're seeing is that it can, and it, in particular context, whether a ketogenic diet and adapted to it for long enough, at least 4 weeks or more, or these very high forms, very fit athletes who have extreme metabolic flexibility between carbs and fat, they're able to actually tap into high levels of fat, which is a common predictor of high level performance. If you can tap into more fat oxidation, it's often associated with higher performance, even on a high carb diet. So the question is, if an athlete were to hear this and they say, okay, well, like, what am I supposed to do then if I'm trying to maintain my health? The number one thing I would say is, especially if they're starting to see levels of elevated glucose levels, or they even want to try an alternative form of diet that goes maybe against everything they've heard their entire life about what requires for performance. The number one thing is, okay, maybe they're dabbling in this ketogenic diet realm. Maybe they want to get this very low carbohydrate based diet. The number one thing that I try to tell athletes up front, because they may try and like, oh, it didn't work for me. And I start asking more questions, even elite level athletes. And I'm like, you did a couple things clearly wrong, but they're preventable and they're predictable. Mm-hmm. Number one is, when athletes do these diets, they need to be very conscious of their caloric intake. Oftentimes when they do these very low carbohydrate based diets and they're not consuming these highly glycolytic processed carbohydrates, it could be easy to caloric restrict. So it's very important to see what your caloric intake, so track your calories, see what calories maintain your body weight at your current activity, and maintain a level of calories that sustains your current energy needs. Don't go into a caloric restriction, because yes, that probably will impair your performance over the long haul. Number two is to ensure that the diet is well formulated. Okay. That's much more important for an athlete who, when you're talking about micronutrients, macronutrients, phytonutrients within various components of the diet, that is much more important in that setting than it is in other settings. The amount of protein for these athletes is also quite important. Typically, it's recommended to consume upwards of 1 gram per pound of body weight. I think that is much more important for athletes than it is for the gen pop, because they're utilizing their muscles at high rates. And the reason we recommend 1 gram per pound of body weight is because it enhances the recovery response to exercise by providing sufficient amino acids and stimulates something called a muscle protein synthesis response. Another thing that athletes need to prepare for is to ensure that they're buckled in to this journey for at least 4 weeks. Because if they do it for 5 days or 3 weeks, multiple studies have shown they might see a marginal impairment in performance, maybe 2%, but they need to allow for the time to sufficiently adapt them to the diet. So they need to prepare themselves for at least a 4-week journey. There's other components to this diet that also are critical for the athlete, particularly hydration and minerals. We know that when you first engage on this diet, and we've talked about this at length, Tom, that you will reduce the amount of insulin, which can be a great metabolic health factor, but it also means less sodium retention, less water retention. And so it's important to also supplement with sodium, or make sure you're having sufficient amount. Athletes usually have to supplement within the first 4-week window, and maybe even a little bit longer, maybe to a less degree, but still doing so to make sure that they're not experiencing any of the issues revolving low sodium in the blood, which initially happens when you first transition to these lower insulin environments, lower glycemic environments.
Creatine's super helpful there too.
Yeah.
In that introductory phase.
Yeah. So creatine is one, it's incredibly helpful across the board, but it's also one of the most reliable sports performance tools there is. It's also emergent evidence shows it can be helpful for cognition as well. There's a lot of variables in those studies, and a lot of it's emergent. So, but either way, it seems like one of the most harmless supplements there is.
Just from a hydration perspective, I mean, it's just like that intracellular water. Found like when athletes are going into that keto state, when they're first like, what is it that like creatine gets into the cell along with sodium. So it's like with sodium kind of drawing it in, it's kind of increasing that intracellular water volume. So for an athlete that's trying to hyperhydrate and hyper mineralize before in that first transitional period, like increase your creatine dose.
And I also think that where you place that's strategically important, particularly maybe post-exercise, because with your meal post-exercise, you are going to have some insulin. If it has any amount of protein, it's going to have some insulin. And so having the creatine alongside with a meal that has sodium in it, and also some insulin response is going to be required for most of your meals, no matter what, even though probably less than a high carb meal, that's going to help facilitate creatine uptake. But there's other supplements as well, like omega-3s. A lot of athletes may benefit from vitamin D. There's also an abundance of evidence. One of the most reliable sports performance tools out there is during exercises, caffeine and the combination with taurine. And so those are things that people can consider supplementing with in their diet. But if they have a well-formulated diet, that's where you start making up for things like potassium or magnesium if you're having sufficient fibrous forms of carbohydrates. So that's why it's so important to have the well-formulated component to this diet. And the last layer to this that I think athletes need to consider, and we already touched on this, is that if you are engaging in a prolonged strenuous form of exercise, that is your sport. Let's say you're a marathoner, Ironman completer, ultra marathon runner, or something along those lines. There may be a place for you to strategically place just a certain amount of carbohydrates, what I call the minimal effective dose. Enough to maximize your benefits, but not so much where you start consuming enough carbohydrates to spike insulin responses, shut down fat oxidation, or tremendously lower it. Getting sufficient amounts that gives you the maximal return on investment without inducing any of these other major changes that one could contend would take away from your performance, like paradoxically breaking down muscle glycogen early on in exercise when you actually want to keep that potentially for the sprint at the end.
That's awesome. I mean, the only thing I want to wrap up with that I think is very interesting is coming back briefly to the fact that fat oxidation was continuing to occur at higher intensities. First of all, that's fascinating. We've beat that horse a lot. Okay. But this is after weeks on a ketogenic diet. We don't have the cohorts to look at what happens after years of on a ketogenic diet, right? I mean, we have some small data, but not, and I'm not saying that from a negative way. I'm imagining that people probably just get more and more and more enzymatically efficient at utilizing fats. Because I mean, that's what the data shows. It's almost dose dependent from a time perspective. It's like the longer they're on, the better they are at doing it. The body is highly adaptable. And, you and I both, I mean, I've said it for a long time, like 10 years. I was, there was a period where I was like about 4 years ketogenic diet without really touching any carbohydrates other than like, and during that period, and we both know Dom D'Agostino too. He's like a freak with this too. I was really bigger, faster, stronger at that state than I ever have been in my life. And then we look at people like Dom D'Agostino that can, dude can rep 505 for 12 plus on deadlift, and he's strict ketogenic. And it's just like,
he did that fasted, by the way, not even on a ketogenic diet.
It's just like, so he's so efficient and metabolically clicked into that the adaptation just continues and continues. But I think the big piece that I want to come back to is I know that people watching and listening to this are curious. If you are able to increase your maximum intensity under, at a fat oxidation, I mean, that essentially means that you could literally go do a higher intensity workout and burn more fat, like from a body composition perspective. I mean, it literally would mean that. So whereas we've previously thought that in order to burn fat, we have to stay in this lower intensity zone. So by modifying the diet, we can now shift the entire fat burning zone up to a higher intensity, meaning like even when you go and resistance train or you do something like that, you are now also burning more fat than your counterpart that's resistance training that is not on a lower carb ketogenic diet.
So to that point, it's interesting. I never actually thought of it that way, Tom. You're the first person to bring that up to me in that respect. But everything you're saying does make sense. That you are 100% burning more fat. I mean, we've seen some athletes go up and their fat oxidation capacity from high carb to ketogenic over a 4 to 6 week window, upwards of 300 to 400% higher. Their reliance on carbohydrates can drop substantially along with that. So, and keep in mind, it's not like they're burning zero amounts of carbs after that. They're actually using a more equivalent of both forms of fuel substrate. But yeah, it's an interesting point. I never thought about that. It would be very interesting to look at that over time to see that effect. But one thing I also want to touch on when I'm thinking about this from a body composition perspective is that often when people go on a ketogenic diet, they lose water weight. They lose, because of the sodium drop, because you're not holding as much of that water weight when you have lower insulin levels with these lower carbohydrate diets. But when you have lower water retention, one interesting aspect that I think about a lot is that people are like, well, what about your peak power output? What if you're able to maintain power output at a lower body weight just because you lowered water weight? That could be a tremendously valuable asset for athletes who perform based on power to weight ratio, which is most major sports. Now, if you're talking about powerlifting, if it's at the ultra heavyweight level, irrelevant, big as possible. But if you're weight class dependent or your sport, hockey, basketball, football, all these things are contingent on how much power you can put out proportional to your body weight in some respect. Okay. And as a result, that could be a situation where some individuals can benefit from attempting to maintain their power output and just having lower overall weight. In fact, there's some studies that show that even, although a little less robust, just a little sprinkle of studies here or there have shown that even some athletes who get into a not real dehydrated state by any means, but even a marginal, where they see some marginal levels of lower body weight while they're doing endurance exercise, can actually perform better because they're holding less weight. And
plasma volume equation there too. I know that like sometimes if you reduce your plasma volume, that you can actually, there's some interesting stuff there, but it's kind of fringe. But yeah.
So I actually know a lot less about that. I'd be curious to pick your brain on that. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, it's just there's I think for anyone who's interested in this, even those who are at the top end, I think it's important to consider. Most people get into this, they'll think, oh, well, I'm never going to try that because they don't want to risk any consequences related to, let's say, their performance, or if they're getting paid to do this, they're even more potentially apprehensive. But a lot of that apprehension, I hope, will be removed because you'll never know what you may gain from doing this unless you try. Okay. And I think that is something that is lost on many people. It's like, well, why do you even need to do it? I'm like, well, there's a lot of reasons why someone may consider doing this. And it may not be today why they need to do it. Maybe tomorrow or later on in life when we start getting a higher and higher level of focus around health. Because in youth, you're like, well, I'm fine. I don't need to worry about this. I got forever to live. Because you're just looking at everyone around you and thinking, I got time. Whereas the reality is that we are aging proportional to what we do, not only today or even in youth, but it's the accumulation of those choices over years and years and years that ultimately make an impact. Just like the analogy of the first cigarette you smoke doesn't give you lung cancer, but it's the amount of cigarettes you smoked over years and years and years, every single day, over time. That total volume is what's predicting your incidence and risk for overall lung cancer risk. And the same can be applied of the overall health choices you make, not just that one meal or one day, but it's the weeks and months and ultimately years of those choices that accumulate into the life well lived, not only your health span, but your lifespan. And so I think that it's important for people to find out what fits them best and try different things, maybe even at different points in their life to fit their goals, not just for performance, Tom, but also to maximize their health.
No, I'm with you, man. Well, Andrew, where can everyone find you, brother?
I try to put out as many free resources as I possibly can at andrewkoutnik.com, ANDREWKOUTNIK.com. I'm also active on Instagram and YouTube at akoutnikphd, and also on X and Twitter at AKOUTNIK, so akoutnik. If anyone wants to reach out there or just kind of see the most up-to-date literature that we're putting out on these topics as idea evolves and as science kind of grows, we learn more and we evolve our thinking.
Right on, my man. Thanks, my dude.
Hey, bro. Appreciate it, man.
that the progress we celebrate today is felt in the daily lives of the ordinary people on the African continent.
Representing here today, are we all feeling inspired by impact? No, it's so quiet. Are we feeling inspired by impact? I definitely am. I'm thinking of different ways that I can be able to continue to raise more capital for young people in my beautiful country and raise more capital when it comes to women empowerment. It has been such a beautiful, beautiful morning as well, just seeing all the different videos of women taking to the streets as Women for Change has led the charge for us this morning. But of course, they don't stop. They've continued to galvanize each other and stand in unity. And we can only but hope that the words, the commitments that have been made will actually be transformed into actionable, tangible impact. Do we have anyone from the private sector here? I've never known people from the private sector to be shy. Has Global Citizen made you shy? We're not going to ask for money. I just want to know what your CSI is looking like. That's all. Anyone from the public sector? All right, okay. The public sector said we'll see you next time. Anyone from multilateral organizations? Any youth in the house? I see you on case. Any youth in the house? Are you over 40 and you said woo, woo, woo? Anyone who's been able on dad.
Martin, Prime Minister of Ireland, Mr. Hugh Evans, the CEO of Global Citizen, all of you distinguished guests and viewers from around the world. From the outset of South Africa's G20 presidency, we said that this would be an African presidency. We said that we would strive to bring the priorities of our continent, Africa, to the center of global dialogue. It would be a presidency that advances solutions through genuine collaboration and partnership. On the eve of the G20 Leaders Summit, which opens tomorrow here in Johannesburg, South Africa, it is a privilege to join you all for the culmination of a year-long effort to expand energy access across the African continent. Africa represents the ultimate energy Pandora box. We have some of the world's most abundant renewable energy resources, as in solar, wind, and hydro. Yet, some 40% of Africa's population has no access to electricity. This energy poverty impacts nearly every facet of life, from clean cooking to access to medicines, to quality education, as well as to economic activity. The scaling up of renewables in Africa initiative was born of the need to expand energy across the continent. We support an energy-secure future for Africa that harnesses the human and technological potential of the continent. Over the past year, through the G20, South Africa has advanced the action plan for clean cooking supported off-grid energy solutions. We have promoted the principles for clean, people-centered, just energy transitions. Today, we call on all partners to build on this momentum, and the momentum it has been. Let us ensure that the progress we celebrate today is felt in the daily lives of the ordinary people on the African continent. Africa's vast potential must be harnessed for the benefit of its people and indeed of the world. Through decisive action and global solidarity, we can accelerate Africa's clean energy revolution and create enduring opportunities for all the people of this beautiful continent. I thank you, and I want to thank you for your presence here. It means a great deal, not only to me and Ursula, it means a great deal to the people of Africa. Thank you for being here.
So, thank you very much. I want to thank you, dear Nomzamo, for introducing us, and dear President Ramaphosa, my dear friend Cyril, dear Hugh, ladies and gentlemen, indeed today we come together to power Africa's future. And the case is compelling. First, it's a matter of dignity. Around the continent, as you said, Cyril, 600 million people still live without access to electricity. This must change. We need to invest in energy urgently so that children can do their homework after dark. Families can keep food fresh and medicines cold. Communities can feel safe after nightfall. And this cannot wait any longer. Second, it is also a matter of sustainability. Around the world, the clean transition is in full swing. And we must ensure that all continents seize the benefits. Let me give you some figures. Last year, $2 trillion were invested in clean energy, but only 2% went to Africa. While, as you said, Cyril, there are huge opportunities in Africa for sun, wind, geothermal, hydropower, for new low-emissions fuels, and also for investments in grids, in storage, and other infrastructure that tie the energy system together. And this means safer jobs, sustainable businesses, and a healthier planet. This could become the growth story of the 21st century. And Africa can write it. This is why we're here tonight. And my friends, my third point, this is also a matter of economic opportunity. Africa is a young, dynamic continent with vibrant communities and fast-growing markets. It has natural resources in abundance. This creates enormous investment opportunities in clean energy, which in turn will power economic growth. Because it means Africa's entrepreneurs can get online, it means skilled jobs and stronger industries, and it means more opportunities for Africa's young people. For all these reasons, investing in Africa's energy future is the right choice and the smart choice. And Europe has already made its choice and major investments in clean energy for Africa through our Global Gateway investment strategy. Modern power grids, transmission lines to rural areas, batteries to store renewable once the sun goes down. And we are creating new opportunities for the private sector to get involved, because no one can do this alone. So governments, banks, private investors, philanthropists, all need to work together. to make every euro go further, to make projects move faster, and to make the transition fairer. And that's why 1 year ago, we together launched this campaign, Dear Cyril, Dear Hugh, and it is working. Since then, Team Europe has already pledged 3.1 billion euros to support electrification, to modernize power grids, and to expand access to renewable energy across Africa. Because access to clean energy access to clean energy means more power. It means possibility. It means prosperity. And it means progress. So, in a moment, I will announce Europe's new pledge. But first, the stage belongs to others. Thank you, and I hand over to you, Hugh.
Thank you, Madam President von der Leyen. Thank you, President Ramaphosa, for welcoming us back to South Africa. Ngiyatanda South Africa. Ngiyabonga kakhulu. Siyaphela lapha isiZulu sami. Africa's renewable energy future is one of the greatest opportunities of our generation. This continent, as President Ramaphosa and President von der Leyen mentioned, has the solar, wind, and hydro resources to power entire regions, and a young, dynamic generation of people ready to drive the next frontier of clean energy. That is why global citizens across Africa and around the world have spent the past year taking action to call on world leaders to invest in scaling up renewable energy across the continent. Actions that will show us all today the progress we can make when we work together. This means governments providing investment capital to be used to de-risk projects and hedge currencies, investors bringing capital and scale, and entrepreneurs willing to make the establishment of renewable energy businesses their life's passion, and millions of global citizens around the world pressing for faster action. And over the past year, global citizens took more than 1.4 million actions urging greater investment in renewable energy in Africa, and their voices have already been helping to drive extraordinary results. Over the past year, this campaign has already announced that 4.6 million households are now set to gain access to clean energy, nearly half of our goal of reaching 10 million households so far. These commitments will drive real economic opportunity for youth across the continent, gigawatts of renewable power, and millions of new people connected in their homes. Today is our chance to turn that momentum into measurable impact, and that impact into sustainable power for schools, for clinics, for businesses, for households across the continent. And we're going to begin our Scaling Up Renewables in Africa pledging session with messages from champions across government and multilateral banks. Please take a look.
Secure, affordable, and clean energy is the key to progress and to a good life all over the world. The key to economic growth, prosperity, and security.
Expanding the supply of clean, reliable, and affordable energy is essential to improve the lives of millions in Africa.
Green energy means cheaper, more reliable energy for hundreds of millions of people in Africa. This is smart economics.
Energy means everything. It means schools that function, hospitals that save lives, businesses that are created, agriculture that produces, young people who stay and build the future of their nation.
Africa needs access to power, and together we can provide it. Sweden is answering your call. Clean power drives growth and job creation. It will help to make Africa stronger and more resilient, and it will help us all to keep the planet healthier.
Since its launch last November, we have invested nearly 200 million euro and mobilized another 100 million euro in projects that bring affordable and clean energy to communities across the continent.
That the European Investment Bank is pledging more than 2 billion euros to scale up renewable energy across Africa over the next 2 years.
Também em Portugal, essa é uma prioridade. E também na nossa cooperação com vários países africanos. Temos vindo a apoiar, nomeadamente, projetos de reconversão de dívida em investimento de transição energética. Temos vindo a apoiar a construção de barragens e também pequenas comunidades.
We have provided over 2 billion euro in support to the Scaling Up Renewables in Africa initiative in the form of low-interest loans, guarantees, guidance and grants.
As a nation, Italy has mobilized financial instruments, industrial expertise and technological capabilities to support Africa's energy transition for a total value of almost 2.5 billion euros.
Between 2026 and 2030, we expect to increase our green financing by over 55%. And we aim to mobilize at least 3 billion euros for sustainable energy infrastructure across the continent.
Please welcome Ireland's Taoiseach, Prime Minister of Ireland, Taoiseach Micheál Martin.